Okay, this should be episode 33 of Summoning Insight. I'm Thorin. I work for myself. I don't even really work in esports now. Now I'm just sort of like that character out of the movie Network who just rants at the television, but I just do it on YouTube about different esports topics, and then people like it because it's kind of edgy, and they're like, oh yeah, he speaks to like the revolutionary in me, but then just like me, they go about their normal life in esports like a little bitch who just has to do everything that they're told by the bigger organizations. And you know, you can be frustrated, you can feel like you want a backlash, but ultimately you still turn up on Reddit, you still do all that shit, and we all have to give in to the man eventually. We're all broken on the wheel here. So my co-host, as usual, is Monte Cristo, who you haven't seen for a while, because apparently, I don't know, in America, they still believe in God or something, so they have like holidays and stuff, and like they celebrate these things. And Monte is actually you don't know this, because he gives off this persona of this like cool, calm, collected sort of atheist, fundamentalist materialist, but actually he's a very religious man. He's quite devout, and he likes to go home to pay his respects. So isn't this true, Monte?
No, I'm an atheist.
Okay. And then our guest this week, some of you who, I mean, the 1% of you who were around before season 4 are probably thinking like, hey, I don't know who that is, but isn't he like, is he related to that fat guy who used to do like the translations in OGN and stuff and in StarCraft 2? He is. He's sort of related to him in as much as he is him. Because what happened was, Chobra used to just be like a general peon for OGN and just do whatever they wanted. And he was just like getting water. And I think it was sort of like their way of getting back at the West. It's like they had sort of a proxy of the West in this like fake Korean that comes from America, and they would just make him do whatever they want, and they would just inflict upon him these punishments for what the West has done to them, like losing the Korean War and all that sort of stuff. And then eventually he got that fat esports money, okay, and you know he got into health. Korea actually broke him. He got assimilated. He worked on his appearance. Now he's got his own job even. Now he just works in Korean all the time or something like that. Or do you do like Hearthstone in English or something? What do you do at the moment, Will?
Yeah, I'm still kind of all over the place. Most recently I've done a lot in Korean because of basically the World Championships for any title. They like to invite me on to cast in Korean and help with foreign players.
Jesus, Will, why do you keep riding that Korean dick? Why don't you just work for America, man? You hit TSM or something? What's wrong with you?
I don't know, man. Maybe because I speak the language.
Oh, okay.
My parents were born in this country.
Sure, whatever you say. Whatever you need to back up your biases. I do a lot of casting in English for a variety of things. Okay, but so for this episode, obviously everyone on this show knows each other. Monte and Chobra have worked together before. So once we get to the Korean segment, in theory we can actually have like people entirely engaged, as opposed to normally when we do this show. Like, as the show's about to go live 5 minutes before, I just ask whoever the guest is, like, do you watch Korean, lol? And then if they're like, yeah, I'm like, okay, you can stay for the last half an hour. Like, otherwise I make them hang up. Like, but this time we can stay for the whole show. So the first place we'll actually start is, since we had the break over the holidays, we never got to talk about IEM Cologne's results on this show. And so Chobra didn't watch much of it. I don't blame him. I would advise, if I could go back in time, I would unwatch it myself. But then I'd realize I'd have to rewatch it to do this show, so that would actually be in vain. I'd probably use a time machine for a different purpose. Where else in my career would I go back to? I don't know. We'll never know. We'll never know, I guess. So on that note, talking about IEM Cologne, I actually, believe it or not, I actually like talking about events not just after they've happened, because I've noticed from doing other podcasts and other shows, when you talk about an event like the day after or 2 days later, you're too caught up in it still. You don't really know what like the results mean, whereas you need like time to decompress a bit. And actually, ideally, if other tournaments begin, then you kind of see by what happens there the seeds of what was going on at the other event, you know, how to interpret what happened correctly. So if we just start at the top, Monte, the storyline of this tournament was that Gambit won the whole tournament, and it was billed as like, oh look, Gambit won their 6th IEM, I guess. And everyone kept saying Gambit. They never mentioned like, this is only 40% of Gambit. They were like, I guess Gambit just wins all the IEMs. They've done it again. They're the best team in the West. Like, what did you think of this storyline, Monte? Hello?
I mean, not a whole lot. It was, like you said, it was a lot of new players on this team. I mean, like Diamond and Edward being there doesn't really make it the same team that it was at all. I think Pinoy, their new AD carry, did pretty darn well for being a new member to the team. And yeah, I mean, let's be honest here. This tournament was without a doubt the worst international competition in 2014. And it was very nearly the worst international competition in the last 2 years. But I think that was like slightly shoved out by what was it, IEM Singapore last year.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the Western ones, the Western IEMs is the worst IEM I've ever seen in League of Legends.
Yeah.
Like, admittedly, there were some of the Eastern ones, like you're saying, like there was like a Taipei, you know, like, there was some that only had Chinese teams or whatever that still were probably a little bit higher level competition overall.
No, they were. The only, like the ones in Shenzhen or whatever were I think, better. The one in Singapore that was like MaKNooN Mid-Frost versus IG last year was pretty bad. I'm not sure which one is worse, but we can debate as to what the worst international tournament was in the last 2 years. And by worst, I mean that this is a team that featured like no team ranked higher than 4th in NA or EU last season, and just a very like low quality of play overall. So this is it is pretty dark. The
reason why I brought that storyline up, though, Monty, is because, listen, I get why it's an attractive storyline. That's what sports writers always do. They always want to go with the biggest historical storyline that seems cool, okay? So it's like you're trying to put this event in the context of something else cool that happened. So it's true, Gambit, the organization, the name, which goes back into Moscow 5 with some of their players, it's true they have won those IEMs. Like Diamond and Edward have won those 6 IEMs. That's absolutely true. The problem with it is people kept saying it to try and like force the analogy, you know, as it was the same Gambit. Whereas, like you're saying there, think about it this way. Yes, Diamond and Edward were the same, okay. But let me just give you like I'll remove the names and I'll just describe what this Gambit is like. So this Gambit had an incredibly aggressive AD carry who liked to go directly into fights, assassinate the other AD carry, even if he knew he would die immediately afterwards. Their mid laner was an incredibly passive mid laner who didn't particularly like to go aggressive in team fights and would just focus on farming mainly. Their top laner would generally just play normal top lane meta and then attempt to get a stun off on most of the thing and zone properly. Now, in what possible context is that Gambit? Let me just put it that way for you, okay? That is not Gambit. That's a quite different, and it's called Gambit now, and now we have to delete what was Gambit and make that the new Gambit, but it's not what we think of when we think of the Gambit that won the 5 other IEMs, you know. So
that's true.
We're not being sticklers here. I'm just trying to set the historical context for that. In terms of Gambit themselves in this tournament, though, Monty, okay, the tournament field wasn't so good, like you said, but their actual performance, I mean, it was clearly the best of the teams there, right?
Yes. I mean that's definitely unquestionable. I think Rocket had the strongest single day, I want to say, because I think they looked really good in their first match, but then they kind of fell apart against CLG, and they didn't play up to that standard later on. But Gambit had definitely, you know, a stronger overall performance, and I mean, obviously, it shows in the fact that they won. But particularly Diamond, I think, played really well over the course of this tournament, and Pinoy showed that he could hold his own. But for me, Diamond was really the standout player.
Yeah, I thought Diamond played very well. I mean, he had maybe one bad game in the final, but he had his Sejuani picks all worked. He made that really effective, actually. He was getting all the stuns off on him. It was very good. Okay, let's talk about the AD carry matchup, because the other storyline of this tournament was most people, I thought so, thought Roccat was going to beat Dignitas. Roccat was going to beat CLG. But since CLG beat them, then the storyline, since we all know Gambit, this lineup of Gambit hasn't done anything special, the storyline then became, oh, Doublelift could actually win his first LAN here. Admittedly, it's not a very good LAN, but he could win his first LAN. And so going into the final, a big matchup was going to be Doublelift and Pinoy, this AD carry versus Doublelift. And supposedly, Pinoy's a big fan of Doublelift and all the rest of it. In the actual final, though, here's what I want to ask your opinion on, Monty, because since Gambit won, the general perception is that Pinoy was better and he played better and he like outshined Doublelift. But I didn't actually really know if that happened. I think he did. In game 1, he dumpstered him. That's true.
Yeah, in game 1. But
and Pinoy was good in the series, sure, but wasn't Doublelift just individually pretty good in this final?
Well, not only in the final, but over the course of the tournament as well. I mean, we look at the games versus Roccat, and Doublelift really punished Rockat's bottom lane hard. And that's the thing about Doublelift and Aphromoo that I think a lot of people don't appreciate, is that while Doublelift is not the best AD carry outside of the laning phase, he is probably one of, if not the best AD carry in the world in terms of the laning phase. And to explain this a little bit more, like when we were boot camping here in Korea, there would be teams, most notably I heard this from the KT Arrows, that would play CLG. And they would win the scrims in like 20, 25 minutes. They would absolutely crush us. But they kept playing us. And I heard later that one of the reasons why this was is because Rookie and Arrow were so impressed by Doublelift and Aphromu's laning phase that they just wanted to play laning phase with them over and over and over again. And that's been kind of a refrain I hear from a lot of the Korean teams who had time to lane against Doublelift and Aphromu, is that they are so strong in lane. And they do punish your mistakes, even little mistakes, very hard. And there is a respect among the Korean teams who scrimmed us, I think, here for those players. Now, after the laning phase, that's where things get a little bit dicey, and I think Doublelift's positioning is shaky. His mechanics are obviously top tier, but I think that the game against Roccat, where they really won lane hard, and I think the later games in the finals too against Gambit, kind of showed off the strength in the laning phase that Doublelift and Aphromu can have, and I think that they should be really well respected for that. And Pinoy did hold his own, but Doublelift, I think, did have a pretty good tournament overall and a respectable showing.
That's the thing about Doublelift, actually, historically, though. His strength has always actually been the proper 2v2 laning, just that phase. And that's crucially the 2v2 aspect. That's actually why.
He's really good at.
If you think about when he became super good in Season 2, that's why I always did have a lot of respect for Chauster, because it was quite obvious, actually, that Chauster's knowledge of the 2v2 laning phase was very good, and knowing when to trade and when to attack and how to bully. Like, he knew the matchups very, very well, and you could see how he transferred some of that kind of, like, decision-making to Doublelift. And that's why, if you think about it, Doublelift's worst season was Season 3, when he had Chauster as a bad support again. He had Aphromu, who was very much not seasoned at all at support, and so he struggled in the one part of the game where normally that was his strength. Normally he was supposed to have a strong laning phase, and he wasn't able to, actually, in the first LCS splits. Coming on now, though, in this final, what did you actually think of Pinoy's style, Monty? Because on one hand, he was killing Doublelift a lot, because in teamfights he would literally jump past everyone. Like, he would use the Graves jump in, or he would use the Valkyrie in on Corky to sort of suicide himself to kill Doublelift. Like, I made a joke along the lines of, I paraphrased that famous Froskurin joke where I said that Doublelift is a laser pointer and Pinoy's a cat. That's like what it was like. And so it was weird, because on one hand he was blowing Doublelift up, and it's true, by the way, in this CLG, unfortunately, if you blow Doublelift up in the team fight, you have won the team fight. That is correct. But at the same time, your AD carry dies instantly as well. So what do you think? How will that? Can he have that style as a normal, everyday style of play? Was it a one-off, do you think, Monty?
I don't think it will be a one-off. If Diamond can continue to get leads like he did in that series over enemy junglers, he's going to be so much more fed that, and especially Pinoy, if he's falling a bit behind early, then if he can trade 1-for-1 after falling behind in the early game, then that is a viable strategy, especially if Diamond is getting really far ahead, like he did. I mean, Diamond would, like, get double kills in the mid lane in that first game and stuff like that in the finals. It was pretty impressive that he could do that on Sejuani. So if Diamond's on a jungler that can ramp really hard, and that becomes a stylistic issue, because if Gambit's like, okay, Pinoy, maybe you're going to lose lane a little bit, but as long as you're on a champion like Corky or Graves that has enough burst in the mid game to get into the back line, even if you fall behind, kill maybe a ramping AD carry, and then Diamond's on some like monster Sejuani tank that's doing % health damage and is just fed as hell to get in there, then yeah, sure, it's a viable strategy, I think. We'll see how they play it out, though. I'm not sure it was that calculated, I'll be honest.
Well, maybe they are still Gambit then, Monty. So, because that's actually, by the way, that's the true storyline of Gambit. What would happen is Gambit would do whatever the fuck they wanted. They'd win the game, and then afterwards, because they'd won so hard, the rest of us in the West would naively pick it apart like, this is genius. Yep. Look at the way they constructed this here. Darian knew that if he applied pressure at this moment and drew the enemy to the top lane, then they would have an open inhibitor. Like, that's not what he did at all. He just fucking Darian, didn't he? Like, I've got a question for you, Will. Historical context, what Monty was saying there about Doublelift and his penchant, his strength within the 2v2 laning phase. If you think of the really strong AD carries at 2v2 laning, who come to mind historically? Who would be up there for you?
AD carries that are strong at 2v2 laning? Man, I mean, I don't Doublelift obviously, and then for Korea, I think Imp would come up in 2v2 laning, and then for Europe, I'm actually not sure, because for Europe personally, I've only been very fond of AD carries, I think, actually more recently, and only in a team fighting sense now and then for certain games. So yeah, can't think of too many that I would say like that I've, for instance, this is the way I would look at it, right? And this is why a lot of Korean players have always looked up to Doublelift as an AD, is that when you ask this question, if I think of them as like, this is the person that got me to try that role and wanted me to learn that role, and I can't think of many AD carries that have done that, especially in the laning phase.
That's the thing though in Europe, that was always the thing. It is true to a degree. Europe never had a lot of sick mechanical AD carries until going on to the end of Season 3, Season 4. Like now they've got Reckless, now they've got some of the tabs is pretty good. Mr. Alice is decent. Now, the main one I can think of who would actually come out on this level is, I'd say, Forgiven, because he purposely did try to have very strong lanes and always get he would play Caitlyn all the time, Lucian all the time. He was just trying to dominate laning phase. But in general, in Europe, it's not so much that the AD carries were weak, it's that they never played the carry role like that. The style in Europe instead was more to try and be safe if you were an AD carry. That's why all the AD carries you think of are like Yellow Pete, Candy Panda, Genja. All Genja does all game long in his career is try and freeze the lane. That's all he's trying to do. He's never trying to get a kill or go for a trade. Their job is just freeze. And then the idea is, in Europe at least, the mid lane's the star. He's the guy who's going to win the whole game, be the main carry. And then if not him, you might have a strong top lane. You might have a Soaz, you might have a Wicked, you might have a Darren, whoever it is, you know. So in general, I think AD carry was played differently actually over in Europe than America and Korea and places. The other name I think of that I come to mind is, I think you have to say Wei Zhao. His laning was very, very strong back with FZZF. Like, they used to purposely make that like an emphasis point of their team, I think. What do you think, Monty? Who else comes to mind? Is there any names we've missed?
I mean, we could go way back in time, but in recent history, I think those are going to be the big names. Maybe Forgiven as well. But, yeah, I'm not going to go back too far in time. But, yeah, I think Wei Zhao is definitely a really good pickup. Because if you go back in time in China too, you could even say like Season 2 Kid on IG was also very lane focused. But yeah, it is a skill, and a lot of people I think overrate actually the Korean AD carry's ability to play the laning phase, because they do oftentimes they're actually like weaker than like Doublelift and Afro.
Let me give you an example.
Just watching like scrims of Doublelift and Afro like playing teams, I can tell you that. So.
Yeah, I mean, when I say imp, I do want to add, and when we were talking about Doublelift earlier, the biggest thing that comes to mind is the way I see. Obviously, there's different things. There's 3 other players on each team between the old Samsung White and CLG. But imp, the only reason that laning worked was because imp was just completely submissive to Mata. So that laning phase really was just run by Mata, and that's also why imp, in some ways, was a better like team fight player in his relative sense than Doublelift was, because even in team fights, if he messes up, Mata would just be like, never do that again, and it would be like, okay, like I won't for the next 3 months, and then I'll make the same mistake again. But with Doublelift and Amumu, in some ways, that's maybe why their laning phase can be more natural at times, but then in team fighting, you have this other sense where they're also a stronger entity individually, and so that's where the color comes through. But I completely agree. I would say and this is why a lot of people are wondering, how is this going to come through as all these players move over to China, because Imp isn't with Mata anymore. Now it's like a true test for Imp. Can he really keep shining? And I think that's a really good point.
And a true test for Mata, because we don't know if the new AD carry is going to listen to Mata at all.
It's Vasily, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, if they can't even speak the same language, so. And Vasily isn't as good as Mata is either.
Right.
Or as Imp is, I mean. So.
Here's the thing, though. When you said that, Monty, that people overrate that aspect of the Korean AD carries, the first example that came to mind is actually from Season 3 Worlds.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. When I did interviews and I spoke to Xpecial, and obviously at that tournament, one of the few upsides of TSM was Wild Turtle and Xpecial's lane was very strong.
Yeah, so they did very well against
He told me, like, even in scrims, they would do well against SKT. They'd do great against OMG. You have to realize, first of all, the SKT bot lane, that wasn't their strength, was that laning phase. Secondly, the OMG bot lane's the worst part of their team. They have a safer AD carry. And then Royal Club was the only really beast Asian bot lane that went, aside from, I guess, Prey and Kane. They were okay, I guess. Imp and Matter as well, but they were having a bad tournament. So actually, it wasn't that Xpecial was being cocky when he said that. I could actually believe that just in laning phase alone, they were winning out and they were getting the better of those trades. Now, you have to realize that's also a scenario where if you ever talked to pro gamers from the West pre-Season 4, if they said that they won against someone and they were beating someone, that might literally mean they were up by 20 CS in the lane, or they had like 1 kill on them, and then you're like, well, what happened in the rest of the game? No, the rest of the game's different, isn't it? Like, but I beat him. I crushed him. He didn't have a chance against me. And meanwhile, it's like, yeah, well, the game ends in a team fight, mate. So that doesn't really count, does it? But let's move on then. So in IEM Cologne, we talked about Diamond Procs, we talked about Doublelift. Oh, I've got a question for you, Monty. What do you think of the new use of Graves? Because we saw that Europeans particularly seem to be spamming it a lot. Like, Reckless was on it every time he had a chance at the previous IEM in San Jose. Pinoy used it every time he could here, and he was actually very effective with it here. He was able to get, like, unexpected kills on Doublelift even, where, remember that one in the lane where he just went in solo, killed him, and then, like, Pimp walked away instantly, like, before it even went off. It was pretty baller. That was, like, one of those things in a movie, like, where you don't just, like, blow up the car, you, like, throw the lighter and you're already walking away, like, I guess it's a bad time to die. Just some shit like that's like what Pinoy was like.
I like Graves, especially. I mean, I think that if you're first off, he does very well against Corky because he's so strong, 1 through 5, and can get in Corky's face and really mess with him. So I could see it as a counter pick. But in general, I think that if you are not as confident in your laning phase, he can really give you a boost there. And then also, it makes it. He's not really about sustained damage in team fights. He's about just hitting your ult and your buckshot and blowing somebody up and going away and zoning with W. So I think if you have good skill shots, and frankly, his skill shots aren't even that hard to hit, there's a lower... He's basically just a lower skill cap champion, because if you get ahead in lane and then you could just blow somebody up, then you've kind of fulfilled your purpose, and you don't have to worry too much about positioning. Now, usually his overall damage output will be lower than most AD carries, but... If you're not confident in your laning phase, if you want that edge, if you just want to blow somebody up and you synergize well with the rest of your team, and somebody else in your team comp has that sustained damage, then you can use them and it's fine. So, I mean, I like it. It's okay.
So is the reasoning that he's back, it's mainly actually because Corky's now very strong in this patch, so people are using Corky a lot, and so he's a natural counter?
Well, also, like, a bunch of other AD carries got nerfed. That's also it. Yeah. I mean, they went through a period of nerfing Tristana, nerfing Lucian, like, they nerfed everybody. So,
I mean, I hope you don't have a problem with them nerfing Tristana, Monty. That was ridiculous.
No, I don't have a problem with them nerfing the AD carries. I think we have more AD carry diversity now. It's fine in my mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me think what else we had at that tournament. Oh, what did you think of Cabo Shard? Because, I mean, this tournament was like... You're one of the people, Monty, who always emphasizes that, like, Gnar is broken, like, always get Gnar first pick if you can, like, it's a high priority, and Cabochard tried to get it a lot, and sometimes he had some good stuns, but I've noticed some players get it, like, actually, I think Balls played it one game in IEM San Jose, wasn't that great with it, like, some players, the top players don't necessarily seem that great with it, even though you're saying it's such a good champion, What do you think of this topic?
I'm sorry, you cut out there a little bit.
You always emphasize what a high priority pick Gnar is.
Oh,
and
yeah,
yet a lot of people have been picking it, but some people haven't been very good on it. So what did you think of it overall? What did you think of Cabochard using it at this tournament?
I was fine. I mean, Gnar is a very high priority champion. He is still really strong. And the weirdest thing for me about the entire tournament in IEM Cologne was how far down some of these priority picks were falling, especially Gnar would just like not even be picked or banned, which would unheard of in Korea. I mean, it was banned or like first picked every game. So I was really surprised by that. I do think that perhaps teams are not practiced enough in the West with Gnar because you have to play around his ultimate so well. And we did see at times at IEM San Jose like players like Balls and C9, even though they're a good team, like not really nailing the timing of team fighting around his ult or like going in at weird times. So I think that maybe they're sticking away from that, because the thing about Gnar is you get one good ult with the team fight and you win the game. I mean, his ult is really, really strong. So
how does that work though, in terms of like you're suggesting here as though like maybe there's more of a communication team play element where you have to communicate to your team like we're gonna have to fight now or in a minute?
Yeah, you have to get used to it too.
How does that work from the other side though? Can't the other team also get adept at just going right, just avoid like disengage for the next few minutes?
Yeah. That's the thing, is that when Gnar came out, I didn't even know how much he would be played in the professional scene, because it requires both teams to play around his ultimate so much that I thought he would just be banned because nobody wanted to deal with it. So, and I thought maybe he wouldn't actually see play because I didn't know whether or not pro teams would want to invest the time into practicing with Gnar, because if he's banned, then you just kind of lose a bunch of practice in a very specific like team fighting style. So it's nice to see him used. I'm glad he is, but I still think we haven't seen pinnacle Gnar use yet. It's going to take any team a while to get used to him. But we really, I don't think, have seen the comfort level with in the last two IEMs.
Chobra, have you watched any Koreans play Gnar and it was impressive, or it was good, or they were good on it? What do you think?
You know, during the preseason it was just banned a lot, but you know, talking to CloudTemplar a lot, and then Dongjin, and talking to them, you know, what they've seen or what they've spoken with Korean players, and you know, in passing, I think it's kind of the same agreement. It's, you know, Gnar, what you said about you get one ult and you can win the team fight, and that pretty much can turn the game on its head. It's very similar to kind of what Amumu signified for a lot of metas when Amumu was popular, right? It's okay if obviously you don't want to miss your ults, but you get one good ult mid to late game, and that's what's going to make the big difference for you. You just have to rely on that one thing. Gnar, but then the higher potential is that, like you said, you have to be on top of the timing of it. And I do agree. I think that is one of the biggest reasons why a lot of the Koreans are banning it. Because when they talked about it when Gnar was announced, they were like, I mean, theoretically, this guy's broken. Gnar's broken. But who's going to want to practice it enough to achieve that brokenness, right? And for Lee Sin, even, it took a long time for Lee Sin to get there. And a lot of people are thinking Gnar is going to be a lot harder and takes a lot more time in a team setting to learn than Lee Sin.
And Callista's another one that's probably very broken, but it's going to take that's not so much a team effort. That's like just an individual player effort. But to use Callista's dashing properly takes a skill set that no AD carry has right now. So it's going to take a while, but she'll be really good.
Wow, what skill set does it take?
Well, because it's a very different animation.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so the thing is that you can't animation cancel with her. So like you have to commit. Like once you make an auto attack and you start dashing, you're committed to that. So you have to be super sure. And also you have to learn how to like change your damage output, because let's say you have to be able to think about 2 or 3 steps ahead, because if you dash backwards, then you're going to be cutting your damage output if you go out of range. So you have to be able to predict enemies' movements really well in order to maximize your damage output. But if you can do that, then you're never going to get hit by any skill shots either. So it's like,
so if you were one of these really mechanically strong AD carries, but you didn't have the greatest positioning, and then you can't like mechanically necessarily outplay, like can't like get out of trouble when you go in. So basically, Doublelift, it's off the table. There's another champion. You're not playing this one, bro. It's over. Just go back to the vein, whatever. Actually, what's funny is, you know, when Chobra was describing his conversations he had there with some of the Korean casters, you know that one of the interesting things, Monty, about why Freud is rejected in the West as a psychoanalyst is because he has a lot of really interesting ideas about like analyzing the mind and the way psychology works in humans. But because the West in general still has a bit of sort of prudishness about sexual topics, people reject it because all of his work sort of shines through the prism of sexuality. You know, that's like his focus in terms of how he looked at psychoanalysis. So Chobra went to CloudTemplar and he said to CloudTemplar, "What do you think of Gnar, a top lane champion, just recent?" And then it was like something Amumu, something Amumu, something Lee Sin. That's like the, you have to have the Rosetta Stone to decode the way CloudTemplar talks. You see, Monty, like it comes through his own prism of his own career and his own understanding of the game. I think
it's true.
Like I think Amumu gets brought up in every single conversation I've ever seen CloudTemplar have on those like translated VODs.
Yeah, no, and
it hasn't even been in the meta for about 3 years or something.
You know what's funny?
Yeah,
I was about to say that. Yeah. Every time like there's a jungle change, CloudTemplar will literally walk up to me like, "Amumu is coming back." I'm like, "I don't think so, CloudTemplar." He's like, "He's really good." I'm like, "No, he's not."
Yeah, and it's the funny thing is, you know, in Korean, obviously, sometimes you would think, well, you know, maybe it's for the show, maybe it's just to hype things up. But in casual conversations, he'll be like, "No, but I actually really think Amumu can come back. Like he's really good right now." And I'm like, you know, maybe in solo queue, like maybe in my games. I don't know about like these guys' games. I don't know if it's coming back, but he's very hopeful still.
I also always got the sense whenever I saw him do those shows where they'd have the pro players on it, the True Law show, that every time a fucking good jungler like Dandy or Kakao came on, he was always like talking to them off camera, like, "I think you'd be really good on Amumu, man." And they were like, "Really, young? Yeah, maybe I'll try it." And then they just leave and like, oh, as always, like almost like weirding them out of it. Like, what's this insistence to play Amumu? Like, yeah,
I mean, Amumu brought CloudTemplar a lot of glory and fame, so
yeah,
can't blame him. But
so in terms of CLG in this tournament, Monty, like I say, going into the final, there wasn't really any reason they couldn't have won. It wasn't the case that like you had to go, "No, well, Gambit will beat them convincingly," and you know, let's that. In theory, CLG should have been able to win this final. It was winnable. I have to ask you about one guy, though. There's a guy in the mid lane, Link, who God. Unfortunately, listen, he experienced the full backlash of the circle jerk. As in, unfortunately, when he had that really good game in Game 3, I think it was against Rockhat, everyone, all of his fans, like, came out from under the hibernation that they'd been in, like the sun shone on. They were like, is it a new dawn? Is Link good now? And then they were like, after all the slings and arrows he suffered, I will get revenge for him. And they went on Reddit like, Link just shut you guys down so hard. And then the next day in the final, Link got shut on so hard that like those fans probably just killed themselves. Like, I don't even know what. Like, it wasn't good, was it, Monty? Put it that way.
No, I mean, his performance was as inconsistent as it kind of always been. I don't really see. Link has always had good games from time to time. That's not in question. The thing is that overall his average level of play, when you take all of his games, I would say is like slightly below average. So when you keep that in mind, he's not terrible, but I mean he's like slightly below average on the whole. And I think we saw that same thing here. Yes, he had a good game or two, but overall his performance was not particularly inspiring, and it doesn't look to me like anything has really changed about his play. At least maybe it has in scrims, maybe it had in the tryouts, maybe he was looking better, but in terms of him being on LAN, I mean, and also to be fair as well, he was dealing with a sub jungler situation, and he had to play against one of the best Western junglers of all time, if not the best Western jungler of all time in Diamond. Sure. And yeah, Diamond had been slumping last year, but he did look a lot better at this tournament. He looked a lot more fiery and I think motivated and kind of as creative as he used to be at this particular event. So for me, he was really kind of the MVP of the tournament and the brightest spot there for sure. But yeah, so we'll see how he does with Xmithy. Obviously, now that ZionSpartan has been suspended for the first week of LCS play, we're not even going to get to see a full CLG in the first week of the season, which is unfortunate.
Okay, we'll get to that.
But it was a sub situation, and obviously
by the way, though,
a solid jungler is very important.
With that said, I have to actually give credit. I thought the Think Card guy played pretty well. This wasn't like that scenario where they had Tricks the year before. He played okay. Dude, he's never even played in that team.
Yeah.
And it's CLG, who don't even know how to play with a jungler.
Yeah, that's true, but even so, and yes, he did have to go against a veteran in Diamond. I guess considering the circumstances, maybe he slightly exceeded expectations.
He didn't lose the games for them, put it that way.
It wasn't that he fed, it was more that he did nothing. That was, I think, the bigger issue.
And for junglers, that's a huge thing, right? And that's, I mean, even in solo queuing, that's why the joke is that the jungler gets all the hate, is because if you do nothing, you could be blamed for losing the game, as unfair as that may sound.
Right, and he did have to be fair, he did have to go against Yankos and Diamond Prox, which I wouldn't wish on any like new jungler. That's pretty rough. So I think considering the circumstances, he did all right.
I have to ask this question, Monty, and this is the disclaimer section, okay? Whenever Monty has to comment on coaching of CLG, the salt will rain down. Not from Monty, but people are going to get salty no matter what. Unless he says it's wonderful or some bullshit, and then they'll be like, he's just covering up the fact he secretly hates them. Like, so anyway, I have to ask this question, Monty, because if you remember, one of the big problems CLG had after the period where you'd left, when they did the relegation match, was where their whole strategy fell apart to the extent people joked that they really had like regressed 2 years and they just were playing Protect the Doublelift, and that's how they got back into LCS. Now at the time, that was when they had Zuna around. After that, in comes Skara, and listen, admittedly, he's only had, what, a month with this new lineup, maybe less time, and obviously ThinkCard isn't even a real jungler for the team. We give him those caveats, but I have to say, one of the most disappointing things about CLG in this final was that they did the same thing. Nothing worked in the first game or so, and they just regressed to Protect the Doublelift again. It literally just became, Doublelift plays Vayne. If Doublelift can kite and tumble correctly, you have a chance to win the team fight, otherwise it's game over. Like, they had no other chance to win as far as I can tell. What did you think of the overall strategy CLG applied, Monty?
I wouldn't just limit it to CLG. I would say that all of the level of strategy in this tournament as a whole was quite low. I mean, these are we saw an international tournament, but I think maybe Rocket, once they get Nuke, now that they're going to add Nuke Duck to the roster and everything like that, maybe they have a chance to kind of be a top 4 team in their region. But it would surprise me, I think, if maybe Gambit does as well with some of the changes in Europe. But it would surprise me if CLG was a top 4 team this split. And it would also surprise me if Gambit was. But I think it would more surprise me if CLG was. I mean, we're just not looking at teams that are very strategically sound in this tournament as a whole at this juncture. And so that's kind of rough. Like, so it wasn't just CLG, but CLG did not look great in terms of their strategy and their rotations, but neither did Gambit, neither did Rocket in the later stages of the event. So
one of the reasons, Monty, why some people like really aggressive music like metal or they like punk music, it's not really for like the musicianship. Maybe even they're not into the lyrics or the melody much. What they like is if they go to the punk show, it's like high energy. It's like everyone's getting into it. It's the atmosphere is what they like. That's why they would say it's good music. But if you were someone who like me, who's into like prog rock or something, you'd be like, oh, that musicianship shit, like not very, it's kind of, there's too much noise going on here. I want to hear like quality work, like design, and I want to hear mind and intellect behind it. So along these lines, Monty, I imagine that even though the fans were really excited by some of the games in these finals, they were really exciting, like CLG was coming back, Doublelift was making all these plays in the team fights, I imagine you didn't enjoy it that much. It wasn't as exciting to you, right?
No. I think this tournament was pretty low quality on the whole. And I'm not saying that from a production standpoint or anything like that, just in terms of the games were just kind of bad.
Oh, let me say that actually as a caveat to this sort of a scenario when we criticise the level of play of a tournament. It's not at all the fault of the organizer of any tournament when the tournament is bad. Because I've seen tournaments, and I always say this actually when I work on tournaments in analysis, say they have a fuck up in production on day one, like a game gets delayed 3 hours or something goes wrong with it, or even worse, like there's an admin problem, like someone maybe cheated in a way or broke a rule and it sours the event initially. I always say to the production staff, don't worry, as long as later in the tournament there are a couple of good series or there's a really great game, people will forget about that, and actually they'll say it was a great tournament. They'll just remember the great games, and that's what they'll remember, So if you're the tournament organizer, it's like you can only sort of get the event 50% of the way there. You can do everything right, but if the games aren't good, or if for some reason they're just lackluster, or if a team plays really bad, it's not going to look like that good a tournament. It's not going to be remembered that well, but it's not necessarily your fault, actually.
Well, also, Curse and Fnatic dropped out. They had a lot of problems getting teams because everybody's roster was in flux, and they didn't know if they were going to be able to attend, and blah, 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 blah. So there are a bunch of teams that dropped out of this tournament as well. So it's just kind of a rough time. It's hard to have tournaments, I think, during the off season when everybody's personnel is moving around and teams may not be practicing quite as hard. We'll see what happens once the actual split starts. But yeah, I guess I don't have a lot of hope for CLG. Obviously, I hope the team does well, but just based on the moves they made in the off season, I don't have a lot of confidence, especially when we start comparing them to teams like, Curse, which will probably be quite strong, Cloud9 and TSM, which will probably continue to be at the top, and Dignitas. We haven't even really talked about Dignitas in this tournament.
First things first, Monty. Before you get into any deep analysis, before you actually attempt to break apart what happened in the game, I will just sort of say in my own way, like, Monty, haha, Dignitas lost a game to some shit team you've never heard of. Ha 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 ha. They did, right? They got dumpstered.
Yeah, Dignitas is a little bit worrisome. Crumbs' play was kind of like Link's, very inconsistent in the games that he was going through, and then
wasn't it their bot lane was shit or something?
Okay,
I forget who got dumpstered
Core,
the most.
Yeah, they did get dumpstered. Core and Kiwi Kid, and the thing about it is, I think people will be quick to blame Core, but Kiwi Kid was missing a ridiculous amount of skill shots in bottom lane trades. Like, so when you miss all your skill shots, the other team can just like all into you and or like win the trade and then chunk you out of lane, or then get you low enough that they can all in you later. Like, it was really bad, and so clearly there are some synergy issues that need to be worked out between Core and Kiwi Kid, but just from an individual play perspective, I mean, Kiwi Kid has to be able to hit some more of these skill shots, especially in the laning phase. So that's kind of a big red flag for me. In terms of I think the only person who did consistently well on Dignitas was their new top laner, Gamsu. He was actually quite good. He was very impressive, I think, especially his zoning play with Maokai was really strong. So I think that if they can fix some of the issues with the bottom lane, and in fact, if they have a player who is as good as Gamsu is up in the top lane, I think that Core and Kiwi should just focus on not making mistakes and staying alive in the bottom lane and just trying to let him carry out of top lane. Him and Shifter. I think that's probably the best way forward. So we'll see. They have some synergy issues. I know they haven't had like a coach or anything to work with them either. So, but they've got to get some better infrastructure, I think, ASAP, and figure out more of their identity as a team, because they look pretty disjointed.
See, when Monty was saying all that there, I just found myself sort of thinking to myself, like, who does this yank cunt think he is? He's not my messiah. In jokes, guys. References to the old shows. It's a little Easter egg for anyone who remembers that one. We love Dignitas, by the way. A great organisation. I like them personally. I enjoy them. Got a good sense of humour. So, okay, going on. In terms of... Okay, that's pretty much IEM Cologne. I don't think there's much more to talk about there. Oh, I've got one last question, because since we were talking about CLG, we'll lead into the CLG topic. So it was just announced, actually, I think today, that CLG have been fined. No, it's not. You haven't, like, it's not a rerun of an old episode. It happened again. Yeah, they got fined again. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. They got fined again and again for poaching. Even better, genius. Like, at this point, why don't we just go back and set private investigators on every single trade CLG's ever done, and maybe we can rack that number up, you know. It can become like a telethon, because remember, the money's going to charity here. So we'll figure out, like, what happened to Dexter, you know, all of them. So apparently in ZionSpartan's trade, I read the news, and basically what happened was it was suggested that Doublelift contacted ZionSpartan privately and sort of asked him, like, do you want to play for us? Sort of encouraged him, or some sense, to come and join CLG. Then, presumably because of the previous fine, and knowing that, like, at this point it's like the wire, like, you know, like the whole place is tapped out, there's informants working against them at this point, like Dexter hasn't been seen in a few months, like they don't know if the feds got to him and made him, you know, he ratted and suddenly he's enjoying life in Europe, like they don't know what happened. So they actually came forward themselves and volunteered the information that they had attempted to poach, or they'd broken the anti-tampering rules of Riot. But because they came forwards and did it themselves, sort of snitched on themselves, Riot, much like the federal government, was willing to give them like a reduced sentence in order to encourage snitching from other teams and players, you know. And so, what do you think on this whole topic, Monty?
Okay, well, I mean, that's kind of broad. What do I think about the entirety, like them snitching on themselves? What do you want here?
Okay, what do you think of the idea that they snitched on themselves? It's puzzling, right?
I guess. I mean,
unless you knew they were breathing down your neck, just gamble and hope they don't catch you.
I would say gamble and hope they don't catch you, but it says that they must believe that there was evidence, and considering that OD was tweeting about them, like poaching Zion, probably OD had evidence on it and would have come forward with it. So I think probably just given the fact that they probably were caught with their hand in the cookie jar already, they might as well admit that their hand was in there.
See, in game theory terms, Monty, I would say, like I said there, like the best approach in game theory terms, once you know that people are watching like this, is just get everyone together and just agree, listen guys, we're the only ones who can snitch any of us out, okay? If you don't snitch, if I don't snitch, if he doesn't snitch, we can't be caught. If we all just agree to deny it. So essentially, we're just going to close ranks, we're going to work as a team, and on teamwork alone, not just our individual capacity, we'll be able to win this situation. But then the problem is they're CLG, so yeah, that's the history of CLG right there. You know, if we could just work together as a team and believe in each other. Yeah, I know, Doublelift fucked us over. He went solo, he did his own thing, now he's got us fined $2,000. Like, I want to say this, Monty, you don't have to agree with this at all. I know you have like links with Riot, you like the way Riot does things, you're a big fan of their methodology and philosophy. But personally, I'm an independent person. I'm allowed to say whatever I want. I actually think this whole tampering thing is a really problematic scenario, because essentially it's only there this is a weird thing. Okay. In terms of the law, I sometimes jokingly say to people when people say such and such is illegal, I say, well, technically it isn't. It's just illegal to get caught. As in, it's only illegal if the legislation covers some aspect in which you can then be proven to have done that. If you actually commit the crime but they can't prove it, you don't get caught for it. You don't get punished for it. So in the same scenario, the only real thing about this tampering issue is really all it can do is make teams smarter about how they tamper. So if you're going to tamper, don't do it in any of these obvious ways which will get caught and this person will report. Because here's the reason why I'm saying that, Monty. League of Legends as an esport will not exist if tampering rules were, if everyone 100% upheld them. Because think about this, okay? So it's during like the end of the season. And ZionSpartan's still contracted to Dignitas for 2 more weeks. And so I'm thinking about, I need a top laner for my team. Let's say my team's hypothetically CLG. I need a top laner. Right, my first move is not going to be go to Dignitas as CLG an organization and say, as CLG the organization, we'd like to know if we could talk to ZionSpartan about possibly becoming our top laner. If you did that, it would make the process of getting new players and even figuring out who would want to play for you, if they would even have the same ideals as you, it would make it so protractive and so drawn out that I don't think any teams will ever be able to do this. I think all that'll happen is they'll say they do that, but a lot of them will still do the same method, where I know most pro players, part of the reason why they come into teams with each other is they're already friendly with that guy. They already talk to that guy in private anyway. That talk is already going to go on, even though technically it's illegal. It's just that teams have to get smarter about not getting caught by their tampering rules, because I can't see how it can exist. It's not like the New York Knicks have to ring up the Pacers and say, is this player going to be available? That's in 10 years maybe it could be, but not right now. That's just not feasible for how the world works.
No, and you have to make plans too far in advance too, because the thing about it is the players themselves aren't going to wait for their contract to expire, go on the free agency, be like, I have no idea what's happening. Maybe I'll get offers, maybe I won't. Like, that's just not going to occur. But I do appreciate your "if I did it"-esque rant right there from OJ Shields.
Yeah, it's much like those apologies I always submit, Monty. If I did do anything, then I would apologize.
Like this.
Does everyone believe me yet? So yeah. Anyway, no. But the reason I bring that scenario up is because, particularly in the West, that is a part of the reason why players come to teams. They already know that guy. Plus, here's the biggest problem with it is, it's the same problem with a lot of things that are going to happen anyway. It's hard to legislate against them, as in it's hard to actually like prevent these things from happening. Like in this particular scenario, it was claimed in the news post that CLG's management were not aware that Doublelift did that. I mean, listen, we can all argue whether that's true or not, but on the basis, let's imagine it was true. Then, presumably, Doublelift himself took it upon himself to message ZionSpartan, which, remember, they play League of Legends. For all we know, he could have just opened the chat client and just said, hey, bro, you want to join CLG next Thursday? How is CLG's management supposed to stop that? Now, they can put in place fines internally and say, you can't do that if you're a player. But that's why I say it's ridiculous to think it's never going to happen again, because like, at the end of the day, the management themselves, in theory, weren't even aware of this. So it's going to take a lot more of esports getting bigger and getting more structured before this is really not an issue. So I understand why they're putting these things in place right now, but it's a bit unrealistic to think that it's all fixed. And crucially, if you're a fan out there, don't even let yourself believe that no other team is doing this, that no other team has done this, and that in all the recent transfers, they went 100% through official channels only. Like, don't even believe it. Like, you are naive if you believe that, I'm afraid. In the West, at least. I understand in the East, it's much like buying a piece of cattle from someone, and you ask them for a certain price, and you tell them that you will arrange the pickup at a certain time, and the cattle is never actually, like, they never ask the cattle, would you like to go to this new farm or this slaughterhouse? He's just told one day, pack your bags, they're coming to pick you up, your new dad is coming now, and he's a good man, please don't quit the deal. What do you think, Chobra? Was that a fair assessment of how trades in the East go?
To be fair, that also is how player trades go in professional sports in the West.
Right. And so I think, you know, to some extent what you said is true. I think it's a little bit closer to that in the East. But, you know, the other thing I do agree is it's not even just the professional infrastructure that's implemented by the, you know, larger organizations, but like you guys mentioned, it's, you know, for the players themselves, Monty, you said, for them, the span that they are a true free agent is so short. And aside from that, the aspect of esports in general is still not large enough in the West where you do feel a sense of stability. So then for the players, it's a little bit unfair in my eyes for the players to also have to, for lack of a better term, suffer through that and say, all right, well, I have this small period of time where I'm going to have to just leave my hopes up and just wish that some team wanted to take me, or that my team wanted to resign me, but maybe I don't want to be with them. It just gets too complicated. In the East, obviously, the time span may be similar, but again, esports as a whole is a little bit more accepted, or there's a little bit more infrastructure, whether it's same title or different titles, and it still is a mess. So I agree. I don't see it being completely snuffed out in a clean way. In the system as a whole, as it is now, whether it, combining culture, combining the actual infrastructure that Riot's implementing, the infrastructure that teams have on their own, I don't see it happening so much. And I think one of the biggest things with Korea it's not just that they have it in writing, it's just the culture around esports in general has grown so much larger that it's starting to imitate more of that, what we see in, say, professional, other professional sports in the West.
No, you make a good point there, by the way, which is also a fair point, which is for the player who's leaving the team, not the player. We're thinking of it at the moment when we look at the punishment from the team who are recruiting him, right? How are they behaving, etc. But as you say there, if you're a pro player and you're in the West especially, you know that if you don't get on a good team now and you get into a bad team, or you don't even get a spot, or you get kicked off your team, you might have to go into Challenger, or your career might be over. So let's say you're on a team that's decent and you know that a good team wants you. Then you're going to push as hard as you can to make that happen, because let's say you had to wait for it to go through official means. Now, this won't happen every time, but what if your manager just hates that team and he's sort of like, yeah, we'll get to him, but he just stalls the whole process, and in the meantime that the other teams has to make a decision soon, and maybe they'll go a different direction and get someone else. Listen, we know there's rules in place, but you're going to be tempted to at least reach out to them, yeah, well, listen, just wait a few weeks and I'll join you once my contract, whatever the scenario is. It's human nature that the guy would possibly give in that scenario, so we can understand why it happens.
Yeah, and to be fair, obviously without putting out sources, I've seen this happen in the East, even if it's not necessarily from player to team or things like that, but within esports organizations where players realize later they had some other opportunities, whether it was temporary or permanent, and that the relay just never happened in time. And it's like, well, is it fair to me? Because technically it's my career, my life, I should have a say in it. And you should, if you heard about it. But if it never comes to you, whose fault is it then? Who's really the one who's paying the price for it? And it's tough, By all means, I think some sort of infrastructure being set is not a bad idea. But what's the best way to implement it? It's hard to call, especially when still, League of Legends has been going well. Other esports have been around in the West too, but even in the East, we say just comparatively that it's mature, but it's really not in Korea. The more we learn about it, I think fans are starting to realize too, it's not necessarily completely mature. It's just relatively, it's grown so much more that there are other things in place.
And I think it's interesting too, because I think one of the other issues is that the players themselves most of them don't have agents. Which is the big difference, is because when a team is looking, a professional sports team, a player's contract is coming up, it's the other teams can talk to that player's agent and try and make deals before the contract is up, because you have to have something in place in advance. So the thing is, allowing contracts to expire before you can be a free agent is kind of ridiculous.
It also, unfortunately, like I was mentioning kind of there, it can fuck the player. Because let's say the player has to wait till his contract ends. So officially his contract ends, and if he hasn't chosen to re-sign, because remember his own team can talk to him at any time. If he's explicitly not said he's going to re-sign, then his team might think, well, we know you're not going to re-sign, so we've made our other plans. Well, technically they can't have, but okay, in their own minds they'll have other plans. And then his contract expires. Let's say now he doesn't get a spot somewhere else. He might not even be able to come back to his original team, So there's at the moment, it's too skewed in one direction. There needs to be some balance between what the player gets and the organization gets and Riot has in place. At the moment, there's certain things in place, but not everything is going to work out entirely. Because, I've already referenced as a joke on the show in the past, certain very high-level trade that went on that everyone knew about for 3 fucking months, but the player was under contract, and the team even said, he's under contract in our team. He's a young blonde guy who plays from Sweden. Oh, I've given too much away already. And yet, magically, he eventually did go to the team that we all knew he was going to, even though technically, by the law of Riot anti-tampering, we can't have known that rumor. That rumor was a coincidence, Monty. We all knew that rumor for 3 months, but technically, because he was under contract, there's no way that the other team could have talked to him. Therefore, when he was signed a month and a half later, maybe it's like life imitating art, Monty. Maybe the joke is what gave that team the idea to approach him a month and a half later.
Well,
that's the world we live in.
I think that what needs to happen is that there needs to be, because right now I think the main issue is that in other sports, I'm not really that familiar with how like contracting works in sports that aren't the NFL. But in the NFL, there are a bunch of rules in place, like franchise tags and restricted free agency, where a team has the right
to match his offer,
to match the offer and stuff like that. And I think what really is necessary is that there are just more rules in place so that teams have a chance to retain the services. If anything, right now, and this may upset some of the players, but I think the players are too free.
Monte, the anti-Martin Luther King of esports. I have a dream one day that players will have less freedom. They will be restricted to their team. Okay, well, you really have been in the East for too long, Monte.
Come on. The difference is that due to so why the players can be less free is because due to collective bargaining agreements, they are guaranteed certain minimums based on their veterancy, I believe, and so. In that situation where the players were guaranteed like something by a collective bargaining agreement, then certainly they're less free, but they also have more job security in that way, right? So I'd like to see something like that, but the fact is we don't have a collective bargaining agreement among the players at this stage, or any players association body, and it would be great to have one of those in esports for sure that could kind of set salaries and hold the teams more accountable. But if they're going to hold the teams more accountable, then there are other prices they have to pay, including like basically being traded or getting stuck on teams that they may not necessarily want to be on, just because of that's the way that the teams kind of maintain their franchise status and maintain stability. So I don't know. I think it's really hard, but I think that the current system where you have to wait for a contract to expire to talk to a player is both kind of unenforceable, because you'll catch people doing something maybe 1 in 10 times, and also it's just not something that will happen, because you have to be, the players need the security of knowing that they're going to have a job and knowing where they're going to be going before that contract expires, and leaving it up to chance. If you're a player and you know your contract's going to expire in a month, and the team owner's like, hey, would you, I want to re-sign you, blah, blah, blah. And it's like pressuring you to do that. Well, at the end of the day, the team owner's unsure if the contract just expires as to whether you're going to be on the team. Maybe he starts getting nervous. Maybe he starts trying to find other players to replace you in case you leave, in which case he's breaking rules too. Like, it's just a whole shit show.
It's so, and it turns into, and if you want to follow the rules professionally, then it just turns into a whole slew of mind games where it's like, is this player going to leave? So then should I keep that in mind? But then will that player want to join my team?
By following the rules when everybody isn't, you put yourself at a competitive disadvantage as a player or a team owner, where you may be out of a job, or your franchise, your team may go to shit because you're the one actually obeying the rules.
What happens, Monty, is in future CLG will just say, they'll be in a room in which a player happens to be in, and they will just announce to no one, if you want to join CLG, place a rock on the corner speckled frog statue, and then they'll just go away, and then later when no one's looking, they'll come back and they'll see a stone placed there, and then they'll know, and then they'll have gotten around the anti-tampering rules. Okay, Chobra, I'll set the scene for you. Okay, a few years from now, there's a very controlling player union that's run from around the world. Like Snoopy runs it. I'm purposely picking Snoopy, by the way, to set up the rest of the context here. So Snoopy runs it, this Scottish guy. And then it's going to be a reversal of the roles, remember. And then Monte has been captured, finally. He's been on the run for a long time. He's been an enemy of player unions and player freedom, So finally they capture him, and they set him up in an elaborate torture scenario, okay? They're cutting him up, they're like quartering him, they're like fucking with him with that big hook that like cuts the intestines up, and they tell him the whole time, all you have to do is swear fealty to unrestricted player freedom and kiss this ring of, well, I don't know, a CLG EU ring or something. They just tell Monte, if you do that, then you can do it. And remember, it was setting the stage here. And so instead of like in Braveheart, where he just decided instead to shout freedom, Monte just shouts restriction, and then he is killed. And that's the heroic last stand of Monte in this particular scenario. Okay, we understand your intentions now, Monte.
I agree with Monte, and I don't agree in the sense that I necessarily agree that that's the way to go, but the part I agree in is, the players eventually also have to make a choice in what is it that they want. If they want more freedom, but you want to take it a somewhat professional route and not cross over too many conflicts of interest, then maybe you do have to sacrifice your stability, right? Because if you just want to represent yourself and do what you want, then if you don't work with an agent, and then obviously Riot is going to want some sort of rules for this kind of system. You do have to sacrifice that, but in my opinion, what I do agree is I do advise against that. You know, if you want to stick with this field in general as esports as a player, then at some point, you know, given a little bit of that freedom for, you know, the benefit of that, you have a stable reliability in being able to stay here and do a job you love as a whole.
Monte, this whole thing with CLG getting fined, because now ZionSpartan can't play for the first week, and they've lost Skara for the first 3 weeks. This pisses me off no end, but in a way you probably won't realize. Okay, so let me describe the history of CLG for you. The first split, okay, things are fine there. They have the first split. Summer split of CLG. Remember, they have Ni and Tonso role swap into top lane. They have Big Fat LP role swap into jungle. They have Monte Cristo come in as the coach. So they have 3 different areas where when they're doing badly initially, they're like, guys, listen, it's a brand new roster. This guy just changed position. This guy just changed position. We just got a coach. You've got to give us time. These bad results, they're not bad results. You just got to give us time, okay? The potential is there. So after that season, you come into the spring split. Now in the spring split, you're supposed to have Dexter from day one. You don't have Dexter. So instead, it's like, listen, Dexter isn't here yet. We've got to use subs. You know, Monty's still adapting. They're still adapting his system. Give us time. This is potential. Like the lineup, you can't count the first results. Just give us time, okay, guys? Finally, in the summer split, they get him on up. Here comes Seraph. Seraph hasn't played in our team before. You've got to give us time. This is a new lineup. Guys, don't judge us too harshly. So this season, finally, they have a full-time jungler who's in the team. They have a full-time top laner who's in the team. They have the coach all set up. I'm like, finally, we can actually count. We're allowed to look at the first few weeks of CLG games as real games. And then they get themselves fined. They get the top laner thrown out for a week. They get the coach thrown out for 3 weeks. So now the first 3 weeks is going to be the same shit again. It's going to be like, yeah, well, the main reason we couldn't win is because like the problems with Skara and the new lineup, and we couldn't play with this player in the top lane. And
the Skara stuff really isn't too much of an excuse, just because it's not like Riot can't stop him from coaching the team in the house or anything like that.
Right.
He probably can't come to the studio or whatever, and he won't be able to do picks and bans. But Zix, Tony, their analyst, who's been with the team probably about 6 months now, maybe 8 months. I forget when we started. We started working with him kind of halfway through the last summer split. But and he's great, but he'll be there. He'll be able to be there to be in the pick and ban phase with them and everything like that. So
I feel like you're very naive about coaching, Monty. You're talking as though like coaching is like preparing a team, going over the strategy, having people know their role. But actually, I've watched a lot of interviews, and I happen to know for a fact that the real purpose of a coach, okay, is between games when you lose. He's supposed to be like, guys, you can still do it. I believe in you. Like, come on, fight for each other. Listen, everyone get together. CLG on 5. Hey, and then you go out and you play the next day. That's what a coach is all about. Haven't you learned this yet, Monty?
I will admit that like being the emotional support there is definitely very helpful in making adaptations, and certainly I think with the pick ban rule coming into play that it will be important as well for the coach to be there. But I think that most of it's going to be preparation, and Skara will still be able to help without that. Also, Zion's only banned for 1 week. It's what, like 2 games? So
let me ask you a controversial question then, Monty. Is that an area in CLG? Admittedly, you weren't there in person, but is that an area where maybe you weren't as good as a coach, like you weren't as good as the emotional aspect of like knowing the people's personalities and who needs to pick me up and all? Because I imagine you, unfortunately, Monty, I imagine you as like a relic from the 1940s, and you're more of a sort of Bogart type character who's like, you pick yourself up, see, and you do your like that's, you know, I'm imagining you being a bit harsh, Monty. So were you in tune with your feelings there?
I think that was one of my shortcomings, I think, as a coach.
Okay. You're like, a man's got to be a man, Doublelift. You got to do it for yourself. Like, anyway, there's only so many impressions I can do on one show. So,
and then I drink a bunch of whiskey and walk out into the rain in a trench coat. That is pretty much how it worked. I'm not going to lie.
I can't wait for it to all end with a gunfight, with a shootout with Nick Allen and Riot, and you in like a Shelby coupe or something, hiding behind the door. Okay, so we've done the CLG topic there. A big topic is that Curse have gone to Team Liquid. They've become the new Team Liquid, which obviously itself presents its own ridiculous amount of jokes. Like, my joke was going to be, wow, I didn't know that the manager of Curse is so arrogant that he'd named the team after himself. That was going to be my joke, just to bait out all the idiots who think I wouldn't know that Team Liquid already exists, you know? Like, What do you think of this move overall, Monty? Because obviously Team Liquid have never been involved in League of Legends. In fact, famously, on their website, which used to be StarCraft, they opened a Dota 2 section, they embraced Dota 2, they had StarCraft 2, they had Brood War, they had Dota 2, but they had a League of Legends section, but it was just a subsection, much like you might have like a sports section in the general forum area, you know?
Okay, let me talk about this, because I actually know a lot of what happened at TL, because I was very close with like a lot of the TL writers, because I thought they were doing great work. And I could tell you from talking to many of the TL writers, some of whom are no longer affiliated with the site, some of them who have gone over to LoL Esports, some of them who are on the new like Liquid League site or whatever they made. So if you remember in like Season 2 and early Season 3, Team Liquid was making a ton of really great articles, especially Fionn and Chex and Neo Illusions and these guys. Alex Manasir were writing a bunch of great articles. They were doing some really in-depth coverage, very interesting preview pieces, fun award pieces, just great work. And TL was not featuring them on the front page of the site, just kind of burying them off, like you said, like a general sports, and like it's like soccer, you know, or whatever, football on the Team Liquid site, because it has a bunch of subforums, but you really had to dig for it, and it was never presented as the articles by the rest of their writing staff, in spite of the fact that especially people like Fionn, who are old Brood War writers who are used to being featured on the site, were just like, nope, even though he switched over to League, didn't want to do StarCraft 2 anymore, like, no, we're not going to feature your writing anymore because it's about League of Legends. And the reason is because Team Liquid was very fearful, because there was a lot of backlash, because the StarCraft 2 fans have always been inexplicably angry at League of Legends for no reason, and a lot of them were also Dota 2 fans, that this would like alienate their audience, which I don't know to what degree that was true. But the fact of the matter is that coming into the LCS, with Liquid sponsoring like a Dota 2 team that's competed in the international, and you know, sponsoring some of the best StarCraft 2 players and everything like that, Team Liquid had every opportunity to get an LCS team.
Well, especially in a world where we had like MaKNooN and fucking Velocity, you know, these teams that weren't, they didn't have much backing themselves.
Even if you look at the start of the LCS, they were a much more wealthy organization than many teams. Like Cloud9 started in the middle of the first year of the LCS. They had a chance to have that Cloud9 team, and they had more money and more power and more influence at that stage. They could have had one of the best teams in League of Legends, I'm pretty sure, if they had wanted it. And so what I find look, I'm glad that TL is here. I really am. I think they're a great site. I think that they have a polish and professionalism, and I really respect their legacy in terms of esports. But I do find it funny that after all of them like suppressing their own quality content, because that's the funny shit, is they were making great content and then they were intentionally suppressing it. And now all of a sudden, when they could have had a top team and they wouldn't have had to sell out to Curse or deal with this merger, because the real winner here is Liquid, Steve, the owner of Curse, because Team Liquid never had to give up 50% of their stuff. And of course people will say, well, it's a merger, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but it's like Steve still has everything he had before, because he still has all his team, except now he has 50% of Team Liquid as well. And sure, you could say Nazgul has 50% of Curse, but Curse is doing a lot better in terms of like success in a bigger esport than League of Legends, like with League of Legends than Liquid was. And really, Curse was kind of on the up and up, and Liquid was kind of going down because they had never gotten involved in LoL, and their Dota 2 team wasn't doing as well as like EG or Cloud9 or anything like that. So I think that they really made a lot of mistakes, and I'm glad to see them get back on their feet, sponsor a new team, bring the prestige of their brand into League of Legends. But I think people should know too that like this is a site that was in the ownership of the site and the management of this site were not really very supportive of League of Legends, and it is very funny that now they kind of want a piece of the pie and they're willing to give up so much for it, when 2 years ago they wouldn't have had to give up anything at all, and they could have easily become much bigger than Curse ever would have been. Much bigger than Cloud9. And it's because they were like afraid of their own fans.
Chobra, as someone like me who used to just go on Team Liquid when it was a Brood War site, and we read about Korean Brood War, and that's what the site was about, doesn't it shock you that Team Liquid has a League of Legends team now? I'd like to go back in a time machine, wouldn't you, and tell people this?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. You know, it still feels surreal. Again, you know, I'm glad to see it, just like Monte is, but I do completely agree with both of you. It's hard to believe, because I agree with Monte. You know, when I wanted to look at League of Legends stuff, I'd have to sift through all this other stuff, but I'd have to keep that specific page, you know, bookmarked to dive through all of the rest of Team Liquid to find the League of Legends stuff. And, you know, of course, I'd browse the rest of the community for other content around, you know, StarCraft 2, around Dota 2, but it always felt like you had to hide that you were going to that part of Team Liquid when you were on that site. It was like, oh, you know, I'm not clicking. You have to like open your incognito window and go to that forum and then, like, go back to look at the StarCraft 2 stuff. Like that is what it felt like. No joke, and not necessarily to blame the community or anything. It's just that's how the culture developed, and now we're like loud and proud. There's a complete separate page that says, you know, Liquid Legends.
Yeah,
and
good for them.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to see. It's just a little bit baffling. I do agree. It's
so
just
the League of Legends
that it's happening now.
The League of Legends section was sort of like if you try to find a sex shop in one of those areas in the Bible Belt. It's never like Main Street. You have to go like down an alley, down another alley, past a weird industrial building, and then there's like sort of red lights that just are around it, and you know to go down that alley, and that's where the sex shop is, right down that area.
And,
you know?
and I think that's a really good analogy, because it's like, you know, with the whole like porn, everybody watches it. You know, everybody actually plays the and it's like the biggest thing in the universe, right? Like everybody's like,
I'm sure Riot loves this analogy, by the way, but keep going, Monty.
I'm just saying, like, the analogy is good because it's both like it's the most obvious thing in the world, but yet hidden. And I think that's kind of where Team Liquid was. But people, I think, are correct to celebrate Team Liquid's arrival in League of Legends, but at the same time, they should know a little bit of the history, because there was a big push against the writers and everybody at Team Liquid, the staff members who were doing a lot of good work and making good content over there. They wanted their stuff to be on the front page. They were working really hard for it, and as a result, some of these people just like left Team Liquid. Some of them came to work on like other sites like LoL Esports. Some of them came to GG Chronicle. Like a bunch of these people came to different sites because they were so frustrated with how things were going with TL. And so I hope that, like, for me, while I love their stuff, I love their community, and I love their articles and everything like that, and I love their work in StarCraft 2, they have something to prove to me as a person in League of Legends, because for me, they've never been supportive of the League of Legends community. And they're now making a grab at it because they made a mistake in not sponsoring a team initially. So they need to really kind of go out of their way to embrace League of Legends at this point. And I hope they do. And I hope they do become a staple in the scene. But I guess I have a few reservations just based on their previous actions.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is good. You know, we're not. I agree with it. So I'm just going to go ahead and say we here for simplicity's sake. But, you know, it's not like we're trying to say that people should be wary. It's, you know, you should celebrate, but I agree that it's nice to know the background and so that you can put things into place as they happen, good or bad. So if the good things happen, it can be a bigger celebration. Like, all right, well, you know, they're really accepting us now, and so we can have more faith in this organization and a team. Or if there's some controversy, you can say, well, you know, how much have they really turned? But on that note, for League of Legends fans, right, who may not be as aware of Team Liquid, the positive note is, again, it's a merger. So Liquid, Steve, right? He's going to be there, and he's been a big part of League of Legends for a long time. He knows the community. He's a very well-respected man in the community. So I do think, personally, I'm having a little bit more hope than reservations.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, by all means, it's good to know the background just so we know how to put things into context when they happen in the next year or two.
And obviously, this is a team which is going to have a chance potentially to win LCS. So also could potentially be a great start for the actual brand within League of Legends if they could become the best team in an ALCS within the first split, you know, which isn't unrealistic at this point. Maybe they're not the favourite, but there's a possibility there, I think.
They could be. I mean, certainly we haven't seen them play in a long time, but on paper their team looks quite strong. So they're definitely going to be a contender for #1.
Okay, I have a question for you, Monty, about coaching, because another piece of news was that LS, who was on the last episode of this show, was going to become the coach of MYM, which is the team that used to be Super Hot Crew, because he coached them the previous year, and his plan was he was going to go there. I think he was even going to move to Europe at some point in time, but that all fell through. It was decided it wasn't going to happen. And obviously one of the aspects of coaching now is that you have to have a physical person coach as well. Like, you could have an analyst still remotely, but the actual coach himself has to be the guy there in the studio, and now he gets paid by Riot and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, going forwards, that will be great. Once all these positions are filled, it's great that Riot pays the person and so they can get more income and they are allowed to have a direct role in the team. That's all great. But initially, aren't there going to be some issues in terms of there are people who might be suitable for jobs but who can't move to that country or won't right now? And won't that limit it in the beginning part?
Well, it could. I mean, obviously that would... I mean, it just depends. Like, LS could be coaching the team, right? But he doesn't have to be there for picks and bans. They could have somebody else, like an analyst or a pick and ban specialist, do that for them. So there's no restriction. Like, Riot can't control who's actually coaching the team for the majority of the time. They can only control what happens within the studio itself. So it sounds to me like MYM didn't want to have two people on the payroll, or was having issues with... maybe they didn't want a conflict between possible coaches, or who would be designated the head coach, or what would happen if they got some guy in there and then LS came later, and possible like conflicts of or power struggles that could occur in that situation. I don't really know, but I think that how much it affects you will only it's entirely dependent team by team.
I have my own theory on that though, Monty, which is it's the same as your scenario. Technically, it is absolutely true that someone could coach remotely. Like, for example, you could do all the stuff you were talking about there, do all the pick, everything except be there in person. And even the aspect you were saying you were a bit deficient in, like you weren't so good at knowing the emotional needs of the players or whatever. You could have a person in person who does that, who that's his job, is to be the emotional guy who knows the temperature of the team and how, all that stuff. You could make it work, okay. But precisely what happened with your scenario is similar to what I think is the reason why teams won't consider doing remote people, even if they could, which is that I've noticed it's not that that is the main problem, but if there is anything that could be publicly perceived as a problem, players or organizations will fall back on that and just kind of blame that. So for example, in my own case, Monty, you remember I told that story on the LS episode? Was it the LS one? I think it was the Crepo episode where I told the story that I'd been approached by a team to become a coach. And one of the reasons I didn't take that offer up, aside from the fact I didn't really want to anyway, but one of the reasons why I actually thought to myself this wouldn't be a good opportunity is because I told the organization, like, listen, I might be up for doing it, but you realize, like, I don't want to quit being a journalist entirely, you know, I still want to do some of that on the side. And so they told me, like, listen, we could make accommodations for you, like, don't worry about that. And I said, like, yeah, but listen, I won't need a lot of time, but I need like a couple of hours a day. And they told me, like, okay, well, what if you only had to coach, say, 5 or 6 hours a day? And the rest of the time, you'd have free time, and it'd be like you'd go to your room, the players go to their room, whatever, and then you can do your journalism there. And I said, yeah, the thing with that is, that's a great offer, actually. That's an incredible offer. Like, I could do the coaching. I could definitely, if I focused it, do the amount of coaching I needed to in the 6 hours and get it all done. The big problem there is, if the team ever started losing, I know for a fact certain types of players would use that as the thing they'd blame. Like, they'd be like, well, our coach doesn't even do more than 6 hours. And then, you know, he goes off and does other stuff. And, you know, like, it's not a legitimate complaint, but it's the sort of thing that if anything goes wrong, it's an obvious thing someone can go to complain about. So I just on those lines, I don't think anyone will use remote coaching in that sense. What do you think?
I think that makes sense. I think it will be phased out over time, but maybe there will be some remote analysis done, or have some remote analysts. And I think it makes sense. You really do need the coach there in person, I think, at this juncture in League of Legends.
Chobra, yeah. I have a question for you about Korea, but you can link into whatever you're going to say there. I was actually told that a couple of Korean teams don't have coaches that live in Seoul. Some of them have people who live in like Busan, and maybe they just send stuff in remotely, or they Skype, I think, or whatever the Korean equivalent of Skype is. You know, is this true? I think someone said it was an OGN team that had one of them.
I'm not aware of.
Like, not a head coach, but I think it was like one of them, as in, like, you know, when you have the 3 coaches and one does this, one does that.
Yeah, so in past seasons, aside from, you know, the coaches we see in the studio, that there have been teams that have definitely had, so we'll call them analysts for simplicity. Analysts that have helped, and I think, you know, for the West too, maybe the easiest way to do this. Now, I don't know the specifics of if they were contracted or anything like that in the Korean scene, but, you know, I think the best way to do it is, if you want the knowledge or the assistance from that, again, just treat it like a consultant, or, you know, an advisor. You know, it's just a freelance analysts that can, maybe come in just week to week and say, all right, well, here's what I saw from the games. And then whether that goes through and whether the team absorbs it or not, again, a coach or a manager who's in the team house with them can help with that aspect. And what I wanted to say on that was I wanted to add on, when I was acting manager for Team Zephyr in Dota 2, on paper, like I did the jobs I was asked to do, and it was a great deal because I could continue being a freelance caster. I continued to work at OGN. I got to support Zephyr. I loved the guys. I loved the game too. But personally, in that instance, what was actually worse was personally I felt like I wasn't doing my job, right? Because I was just like, well, I'm not in the house. My doors are open. Like, they can contact me and I can run down there if there are issues that we need to talk through. But it just felt, and over time, and then time commitments and whatnot, and we just had a mutual conversation where I was like, yeah, maybe it's not the best fit anymore. In the beginning, of course, they needed a lot more help with setting things up with paperwork and translations, but having gone through that myself, what I also want to advise is for people who are looking into coaching, like if you want to coach, yeah, you do have to commit. Even if you're in the team house, like it's not like you can be there and then you can go into your office and just do your thing for 4 hours a day and just do the rest during working hours. You have to make your lifestyle revolve around it if you want to fulfill it to the maximum capacity. And again, that's why if the teams can afford it, having a multi-man staff for coaching staff is ideal, because different people take parts in different aspects of it, whether it's the pure analysis of the game and then the emotional analysis of the players. And I think a lot of that is starting to come to light. A lot of the Western teams are starting to figure that out. Players are starting to figure out what they like as they experience more of what coaching is in League of Legends. But, remote coaching, even in Korea, the general consensus is it can't work, or at least it can't take the place of an actual coaching staff. You can ask for help, you can ask for advice, and you can ask for a different set of eyes to look at your games. But a lot of Koreans, for instance, when they retired, the players, a lot of them thought about going to different regions, whether it's North America, Europe, even Brazil, and they say, well, the offer's there, and sometimes even the finances are fine, the terms seem fine, but do I really want to commit going there? And if this team doesn't work out, will I be able to continue to stay there, or do I have to come back here and start a new job search? In that sense, that team saying, hey, it's actually for the first season, why don't you stay in Korea and we'll just do it over Skype? But a lot of the players are wary of doing that because they're like, I don't know if that's going to be a good test of my skill and the team skill. There's just such a big limit of me. I'm just a relay of information, and that should be a different role. Like, I can do that, but I don't want to say I'm a coach then, because I don't feel that I'm doing my job, and I don't think it's fair to the team either. That's the consensus for a lot of players for a while when we had a huge retirement of the first generation League of Legends players from Korea.
No, what's interesting there is that's something people in the West don't realize as well. It's not just that you have a coach. In Korea, it's actually standard to have multiple coaches. Like, I'll give you an insight. You probably don't know this, Chobra, but I actually have a lot of insight into how the Samsung organization has achieved their success, okay? They have a coach who, works with, players specifically on certain things, suggests picks. Then they have a coach who works on, macro strategy. But then they actually have a third coach whose job is, if Samsung win an OGN title, to go up on stage, take all the credit for winning, and then do sort of a breakdancing move up. And that's his special role. You need a guy who can do that, because not a lot of coaches have the in-game knowledge but can also do breakdancing moves. So
and visiting the team house, he was really there kind of just as a friendly fatherly figure, right? He was just there to just rally the team together. He was figurehead, and then they had Samsung had a manager too, who just took care of all the business issues and whatnot, and taking care of sponsorships, and so Samsung actually had a very robust coaching staff, and maybe that's part of the recipe for their success in the past year. We look at HUYA Tigers now, even they're so for Koreans, because this is what the players grew up with, they understand that this is something that new teams need, and so this is an aspect that a lot of players just naturally transition into. We have Concrete going back in as a coach for a team, and now it's with HUYA Tigers, and Nofei's still there as now kind of head coach. And talking to Concrete, he was like, well, we need to still figure out exactly what our roles are going to be. How do we want to establish this infrastructure? But that's the mindset going in, is that we can't just go in and say, hey, we'll both analyze games and great. We need to divvy up our roles as coaches, and then we'll see if we need more personnel, and then do we need more finances. And I think talking to Western players and analysts, it seems to be coming through. It's just, it needs time, obviously.
Okay, so the problem with all that section there was when I kind of lost him there, Monty, when he started talking about like Dota, because I think Dota is like a shit game. I'm not really into it, you know. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of embody the spirit of Team Liquid, since we talk about it on the show, but I'm going to actually dismiss Dota and say that I don't care about that section of the show. And that section of the show actually doesn't have as much value as the rest of the talks that we have here, until in a couple of years from now, either we are eventually driven out of the game by Riot or League of Legends dies, at which point this will become a Dota 2 show, and I'll change that ward at the top to be like the Dota ward, and then we will say that we embrace Dota. We've always loved Dota, actually, secretly, and we're glad to be a part of the Dota community. So there's my own little Team Liquid sort of turncoat move, I believe it's called. Okay, another piece of news involving good old Rito Games. So Riot, it was announced, will be having a proactive role. See the way I did that, Monty? Having a proactive role in the English broadcast of the LPL. And so the way this was announced was along the lines of like, they'll be handling it from now on, because if you remember beforehand, it was like LPL EN, and it was sort of like a little group of people who were doing it, who were enthusiasts. And initially they didn't even have access to the tournament client. They used to have to restream from like a fairly low quality stream on like PLU or something, I forget what it was from. But now in theory it'll be in HD, or it'll be like very high quality, and it'll have a proper English set of casters. And so the announcement said something along the lines of that this Altus guy, who I think did Challenger and NA, will be a caster. But then it was implied, I don't think they explicitly said who the other casters were, like maybe it's not decided yet, but the implications seemed to be that some of the other casters won't be doing it. Like, I know Pyrotechnics made some tweet where it sounded as if he's not going to be doing it, he's going to be going off and doing something else, because he sort of thanked people for being involved with it. I didn't see anything about Froscura, though, so I don't know if it was officially announced that she's not doing it now. Do you know anything about this whole topic, Monty?
I do, and I do know that from what I can tell, mostly this hasn't been like decided yet, I think. But LPL is starting in a little bit more than a week. It starts on the 15th, I believe. It's the 7th as of this recording. So you guys are going to see this a little later, which is why we're not going to be able to talk about the first games from SK Telecom and NaJin, because it's going to come out. We'll talk about that next time. But anyway, so okay. It doesn't seem like, besides Atlas, that they have a solid casting team. I do know that Pastry Time lives in Sydney, and so I think we can probably assume that he's going to be working on it as well.
People also made tweets which insinuated he was going to be involved. Like, they said they'd enjoyed his stuff, and, you know.
Oh, he's a good caster. And obviously they wanted him for Riot NA, but they couldn't get him over there due to visa issues. So, you know, he was one of the first casters that came over to kind of try out, I guess. And I think Pyrotechnics is going to be, I'm not sure exactly what's going on with him, but he did very well, and I imagine he'll still be working with Riot in some capacity, maybe on some other broadcast, once they figure that out. Or perhaps they already have figured it out and I just don't know. But yeah, in terms of what's going to go on with this, I think that let's talk a little bit about the implications of this, because the LPL English stream, let's talk about where it started. You know, I don't know how many people who watch this show are going to be familiar with it, but it started out as them just taking the feed. This was all approved by Tencent and PLU, who's the broadcaster for the LPL, where they took the feed, like basically just the Chinese stream, and they gave commentary over it. Then it transitioned kind of by the time the summer playoffs rolled around, where they actually had, like, they were going to get tournament observers, like basically access to the tournament realm, and they could actually, you know, kind of get that feed instead, and get so they could stream in HD. Because as I understand it, the LPL stream is not in HD even for people in China, because of the way that broadcasting works there and the expense of having an HD stream. I'm not very well versed on this, but so then they got access to the tournament realm, where they could then have their own observer in, and then like Froskerin and Pyrrha were like sent out to, I believe, the Twitch offices to have like an on-camera appearance as well for the playoffs and the more important matches at the end of the summer. And so it was leveling up. They had access to the tournament realm for this upcoming season. Kelsey Moser, who's kind of the brains behind all of this, the really driving force between setting all this up and the contacts with China and everything like that. She had set up so that the new LPL English cast for the entire season, they'd have access to the tournament realm. They were trying to level up their production. But it was still inherently kind of a scrappy, you know, do-it-yourself, more early League of Legends, because this is what I used to do with tournaments as well. when I used to run them for GG Chronicle like years ago. So, yeah. And now I understand what Riot's trying to do. Obviously, this is a very important league. It's the second, it traditionally has been the second most competitive league in the world. And it's important that it does have, more quality production. So I know Riot does have like a small studio in their offices in Sydney, and that they've run kind of oceanic events out of there in the past. So it will be, I think the intention here is really good from Riot, where they will have access to the actual tournament realm. They'll have a little bit more professional production in a studio. It'll be more similarly in a similar time zone, so that it'll be easier for them to broadcast in the evenings. It'll go out on the Riot Games channel, yada yada yada. I think Riot is smart to be consolidating all the English language broadcasts onto the Riot Games channel, so that fans we'll just have to go to one place to kind of see all the different leagues from around the world, and it kind of makes it easier in that way.
Your volume went down a bit, I think.
Sorry.
It's better now.
Okay, let's move closer. So, yeah, with that in mind, I do understand the intent behind what Riot's doing, and I do think that it's fundamentally a good idea. The issue is that by they need to include people like Froskerin and Kelsey Moser and Pira, because these are the people who actually know about China. And for me as a viewer, it's my personal opinion that I will accept lower production quality in return for better information about the players' histories, better storyline information, better kind of presentation of the player and team histories, the strategies that these teams have used, because I prefer that. I don't really care if there is a camera on the casters and spiffy production if the information isn't up at the same level as the LPL English stream is. And from knowing Kelsey Moser and Froskerin and Pira and respecting these people, I know how dedicated they are to the Chinese scene and how much information they have about these Chinese players, and that they have gone out. I mean, Froskerin was just in China for a couple weeks, and she was working with the team out there and then meeting all these other teams and players. And so for me, it would be great if they would include Froskerin and they would include Kelsey Moser, because I do think Froskerin is a good caster and a good analyst as well, and I enjoy, personally, listening to her cast. And considering she knows all the storylines of China already, it seems rather silly to not include her, but they only have a week to get things together in Australia. So for me, while Riot's intention is good, not prejudging it, but on the surface, the execution is looking a little bit shaky, because there's not enough time for the casters that already exist in Australia to download enough information that has been gained over the past year of these people working day in and day out on the Chinese scene. So it would be, I think, superior for them to just use the resources that are available. In a traditional business sense, when you want to take over a market like that, and you want to hire the experts in that field to staff it, right? That's like normally how you would do business. You move into a new field, and you don't just put whoever you got in your company in there. If there was already something established in that market, you want to get the best people that you can in there. And I know that Richard Lewis's article said that there may be some conflicts between Froskerin and Riot, but for me, I think that if Riot was just clear with what kind of behavior on social media was acceptable, and I'm not here to defend Froskerin's behavior on social media, because I haven't agreed with it all the time either, but I think that's such a minor concern when compared to all the knowledge she brings about China, all the history that she has about the Chinese scene, and the quality of her casting, that they can kind of get over it and use her as the valuable resource and good caster that she is. Because at the end of the day, I think that this is going to be a very interesting test for Riot to see if what they value is Riot culture and fitting in with Riot culture, or providing the expertise on the broadcast. And I'm not saying that these two things are not mutually exclusive. You can have both, but to not get these people, to not get these casters who you know have a year's worth of experience already and who are insanely knowledgeable about this scene is kind of a disservice to the fans, honestly. So if you want to level up the production value, by all means, Riot, that sounds wonderful. But there needs to be a really hard press to get the same quality of analysis that used to exist in LPL English, because getting fancy camera work and getting a nice studio and everything for me is not an upgrade if my level of knowledge of the Chinese scene that, or the information that's relayed to me during that broadcast decreases in value.
There's like a famous saying, Monty, that you're not entitled to your opinion. You're only entitled to your informed opinion. As in, like, if you just have an opinion and it's not informed, it's of no value, actually. It's worthless. And you're not entitled to, like, some special respect as a result of it. And so, along these lines, I know a lot of people, their reaction, because they don't watch the LPL English stream, was sort of like, so what? Who cares? Don't like Froskuren, don't care anyway. Whereas, first and foremost, anyone who's watching this show now who's never watched LPL, if you haven't watched LPL and you think Froskuren's a bad caster, well, remember what I just said there? You haven't watched her, but you think she's... I don't care, but your opinion does not matter, I'm afraid, friend. Because I have watched it, and she was a very good caster. First of all, as for a color commentator, her knowledge was very, very good. She seamlessly weaved in details of player storylines into the actual cast of the strategy of what the champions are doing, what the comp's doing, what this team historically does. Secondly, there's certain Western casters where what they pride themselves on, and sometimes they're a bit condescending in how they do it, is they pride themselves on the technical aspects. They've done it for so many years. They know the showmanship aspect. They know the role of the both aspects of the casting and when I'm supposed to leave room here and how I'm supposed to pick up here. Even on that level, Froskuren was very good. She was very good on a technical level. She wouldn't stumble over her words. She wouldn't talk over the other guy suddenly. She wouldn't find herself without something to say. She wouldn't find herself in a situation where she was just giving the wrong information because she was nervous or anything. She was actually quite composed. She had a very good manner about her. Her conversational flowed. She synergized well with multiple different play-by-play casters. That's another thing people don't know. On the LPL English stream, because it was a community effort, they didn't just have 2 people do it every time. It would be like 5 or 6 people, and they were rotating them in and out and having different pairings. That makes it very difficult to synergize if you have to be the new guy each week and a different guy this time. And I did this game that you're talking about now, maybe that guy didn't do directly himself, so he'll have a different memory of it. This is all very difficult stuff, like advanced level stuff if you're a caster to do. And I thought she dealt with it very well. Their team in general seemed like, for all that they were like a scrappy startup and all that, they actually had a lot of polish to what they were able to do with it with very limited resources. You know, they weren't the same level as like a studio production, but you couldn't expect it to be. So I think they could have grown into that as well.
Also, it's worth noting that all of the established little casters right now came from this scrappy startup background. Yeah. We all did. Yeah. All of us.
Literally.
So it's like everybody. You know, doing online tournaments back in like early season 2 and shit like that. And so I think that you have to remember that a lot of the fans should remember that a lot of the casters that they really like now did have to find their identity and like gain some footholds in League of Legends. And look, I'm not here to defend Froskuren's like social media use, which at times I have thought has been inappropriate. But I do think that these are things that, knowing her as a person and having met her in real life and you know, had meals with her and stuff like that, that she's very reasonable. She just gets a little fiery sometimes. That's just who she is. And she hasn't been in a situation where she's had this much like public focus on her. And I think that everybody struggles with that. I know I did when I first started getting you know, more into the public eye in League of Legends, and my career started taking off a little bit more in terms of being a caster. And so you have to learn how to deal with that. And so I think that she has. I haven't seen anything bad or like questionable in a long time. And I think that you should give at least her the benefit of the doubt on that one, and use her and Kelsey Moser and Pyrrha for the expertise that they have in that scene. Because they've proven that they have this knowledge. And it's also not a slight against the casters that Riot will be using. I'm sure they'll be fine too in Australia. It's just that there isn't enough time for anybody to collect enough knowledge to be as knowledgeable as these other people for the start of the season.
On that topic, though,
or even halfway through the season, because it's possible that just due to the historical knowledge of LPL that these other people have right now, the current casters may never be able to catch up. So where does that leave you? I think it's my personal opinion that you should just hire the experts for that scene and then work with them on kind of sanding off the rough edges that you may find there instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I'm sure everyone knows my position on social media reflecting work, which is that as a general principle, I wouldn't agree with it anyway. But even in a world where I accept the premise that people who work for someone like Riot have to behave a certain way on social media, even if we accept that premise, I don't think it's valid to use someone's past when they didn't work for Riot against them now as an excuse as to why they now can't. You can't sort of retroactively punish someone for something they did before they worked for you. As in this scenario, if they had a problem with her social media access, if they said to her, listen, we don't want you doing these sorts of things when you do the LPL stream for us now, if she then agrees not to do them in that scenario, that's a totally different scenario to just saying, well, she did it in the past, therefore she's out and she can never work for us now. I actually know that that's not even how other companies tend to work. Like, I'll give my own example. There was an event, an ESL event, in the past where I wasn't able to work this event because I was perceived to have said culturally insensitive things that ESL as a company would not stand by themselves and they didn't want to be associated with, okay? So I wasn't involved with that event. But later, after that incident with me, they did hire someone to do a different game for them and do casting who literally said a racial slur in his past. Now, here's the crucial point. He said it in his past. He said it long before he worked for ESL. It was years before he was going to work for ESL now, and now I'm pretty sure he would never say it now. He would never say it in that context now. He definitely would never say it publicly while working for ESL, etc. So as a result, it's not even an issue. This was never even brought up by ESL. It's never been brought up by anyone in the community as far as I can tell. It's not an issue anymore. We know that these are the rules and this is the world that he lives in now, and his job now isn't affected by something years before. So I think it's not even that valid an excuse to say, oh, well, we didn't like the way she did things on Twitter before. Well, then tell her now what the terms are, and if she agrees to them, then as a professional, you should be able to respect that she'll do what is expected of her, you know. I think that's a more reasonable way to go with this scenario.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. And again, obviously, some parts of this hasn't been announced or even perhaps decided transparently. So I guess if personally, I'll hold my judgment on the entire situation. But my biggest qualm so far out of things that have been officially announced is, I agree. If Riot wants better production, that's fine. But to me, and I understand that, and so I'm going to go a little bit longer. I understand that it's going to be hard, especially with China, to work on the grounds of China, right? In a studio there, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be a lot harder. But for me, it's like, if you want better production, one of the reasons that the OGN global broadcast works fine is because we're also in the studio, and Monte and Doa can minimally at least understand the chants and certain signs and the reactions, why they come. You understand the basic culture of actually being in there. So if the production is what you're looking for, quite frankly, you can have the prettiest studio you want, but if you're detached from the actual studio, I actually, personally, I don't see that as necessarily a great step up. It just looks pretty, and for an actual tournament of a sport or esport, if you're not in the stadium, it's not the best production you can have. It's simply not. And I can understand that if the argument is, well, it takes so much time and there's so much so many hurdles to go through to set that up in any foreign country, let alone China, then that's fine. But then take the time, take the time and then support the startup crew for now a little bit more. You don't have to brand them as a Riot broadcast. Just support a little bit more. Maybe gives them some tips, or you can lead them to other sources that can make their side of things better, until you have that all set up. For instance, and then the question is, well, now with Champions also being all put together on that same platform, maybe they just want it all together. Again, the argument's the same. If you're going to go for the production, go all the way, in my opinion. To me, this feels a little bit just halfway, where it's like, well, with OGN, because everything's already set up in the studio and OGN still does the production, like we can just, we just have to get through some of the technicalities and the logistics of it. That's great, and then you can just add OGN for another year and then work on LPL for the next year. I mean, I'm a little bit confused again as to why this had to happen now.
I agree with that.
This is how it's going to happen. I'm all agreeing with the idea that it's fine. It's a great idea, it's especially for Riot and a lot for the fans too. But why now this way? I mean, you just one more year. It's not like League of Legends is in trouble of dying out in this next year either,
Well, we don't really know either. It could be possible that they want to take this little step this year and start setting up for the, moving these casters to Shanghai or whatever next year.
I believe that.
Also, it's like, at a certain point, there must be something weird going on with Tencent. I mean, this is all supposition. I don't have anything to back this up, but Tencent should be, you would think, they would be more desirous of an English language broadcast because OGN has proven that you can make money off of it. I mean, it's a good business plan, and it doesn't really take that much more. You can do what OGN does and use all the same camera shots, everything like that as well. And from a casting perspective, another thing that's worth mentioning is that as a caster, it's live performance, and you feed off the reactions of the audience. Yes. And when it's very difficult to cast with just you alone in a studio with no audience and getting excited about the game because you're just sitting there with a computer screen and yelling. Like, it's a different kind of experience for sure.
And even right, sorry to interrupt, but you would know this yourself, Monty. Also casting back in the day for you for MLG, when the audience speaks the same language you do and they react to your casting, that's already different from casting OGN because the fans not reacting to what you're saying. They're just reacting to the players. And that already makes a huge difference. Now you separate that into a separate studio, and no matter how pretty it is, it's going to be so hard for the... And this really, I'm just, I guess, sympathizing with the casters who are going to have to
it'll be really hard.
For them to have to hype the game up, it's so hard. And anyone who's done freelance amateur casting at home for an online tournament is going to realize this. I mean, it's a little different from home because you can raise your voice in a studio. But, man, if you don't hear players getting excited, how much... There's a limit on how excited you can get yourself.
And also, I want to remind fans, don't just go and shit all over the LPL casters, whoever they end up being, because they didn't ask to be thrown into a situation where they had to research years of history in a scene in a couple weeks and stuff like that. So they've got a lot on their plate right now. There are going to be a lot of difficulties, I think, in getting this cast together. Now, once it's all together, maybe it'll be great. I don't know. But I do think that in order to ease this transition, you should, it would be obviously ideal for it to be in Shanghai. But at the very least right now, if Riot wants to do this, if Riot wants to make this more official, I think that using the resources that are already available that are experts on the Chinese scene, and to the degree that, before Worlds, I went to them. I know Deficio talked very heavily with Kelsey and Frostcurrent about the Chinese teams to do research for Worlds. Everybody goes to Kelsey and Frostcurrent when they have questions about China. Duncan and I did when we were asking about, can you give us a list of games to watch so that we can have our games of the year, because they've watched way more Chinese League than we have, and we trust them and we trust their analysis. So... all the casters, professional casters, I'm saying, trust their analysis. Why would they not be involved in this broadcast? They have a lot of support and have been used very heavily as resources. And Kelsey writes for LoL Esports on the Chinese scene.
Yeah, and, storylines, you can say databases, sure, you can look it up and you can memorize it and learn it, but storylines, it's kind of like culture, right? Learning about it by reading an article is very different than having casted and feeling the emotions yourself live when you're casting the players on the stage, or their emotions in the booth after one game. Very, very different. And I do agree. So, I'm on the same boat where I say the idea is great, and I do have very positive hopes for certain aspects of this new production. But, I just wish it had been done, certain aspects, and it doesn't have to be one way or another, but we're both putting out different options here of maybe what we would have liked to see. And again, if it happens over time, it's not a problem. I'm just putting out my thoughts as in, was this really the most ideal way to do it? We'll see. But by all means, I'm excited though, to see how the casters adapt to that. And again, it's going to be a tough job for them. I think that's the biggest part, is that the casters are the one who are going to have to really grind out the work. And we're just being honest.
I don't envy them.
We've seen this happen with another caster for Riot a long time ago, where they didn't cast on the big stage live in an audience, and they used to do a lot of other work for Riot, and they got put up there, and it was tough. And I liked his casting, but the community just was in an outrage. They were like, doesn't understand how casting works, they don't seem to know the game, like, why are they up there? And I was just like, man, you get thrown out there, and that's like your debut as a caster. That's rough. And for these guys to have to do it remotely, it's a whole different story. So, a lot of respect, and I'm cheering for them, but it's going to be tough. So for the fans, I also want to add on to that. Yeah, you should just give a lot of encouragement, and it's time. It's going to take time.
One thing that actually irritates me about this topic as well is the knowledge issue, because crucially, it doesn't matter who you bring in. Listen, I'll tell you right now, this is what happened. But you could fly in tomorrow, Joe Miller and Jat, who in my opinion are the best play-by-play and the best color commentators of the LCS people. Obviously, Joe Miller doesn't work for them anymore, but they were my favorites, okay? Like, I thought they were the best play-by-play, best color. Of those guys could fly in tomorrow to China, start work now, and by the time the broadcast finished, they wouldn't have as much knowledge as the people we're talking about. By the time the first season finishes, they wouldn't have as much knowledge. In fact, I would wager they would never have as much knowledge. And here's why. Because the casters we're talking about, particularly people like Kelsey, who helps the casters as well, and she's like a knowledge base for them, her level of research goes above and beyond anything that these people could catch up with. And crucially, they wouldn't catch up because she's still doing it now. She's gone back and watched like fucking 2011 VODs of Chinese LoL to understand the meta and what this player was doing there. So it doesn't matter. Even the most like able-bodied person with the best intentions, it's going to take them a long time to get to a really good level. And crucially, they'll probably never get to that level of someone who literally is so passionate about it that when there wasn't even a big scene and there wasn't a lot in the West to cover, like embedded themselves in the scene and got like friends who spoke Chinese to translate things all the time for them, and they're following like fan pages of Chinese stuff. These people have gone above and beyond what you would do just for a job. And so say you're a caster, let's say you're a caster who's not even that into Chinese law, but it's your new gig, okay? Like, okay, I'm getting the Chinese job. You go over there, you learn a bit about a few of the teams, and you know, you maybe casted NA, Challenger, or maybe you did some LCS or whatever. It's not going to be the same for you. So unfortunately, you're then going to, by the hardcore people at least, be unfairly judged, like they were mentioning here, like Monty was saying, don't kind of criticize these people. It's true, unfortunately, these people will, it's kind of it's a lose-lose situation to some degree for them because they can't be the best. And so that's a bit unfair for them, but that's also why I'm aiming this more at the people who made the decision to do it that way, because I don't think it is necessary, you know. There was a way between it. And even if you didn't want these people involved long-term, there's at least like a transition period you could have employed to make it a bit smoother and actually to help those new guys out. Like, here's the thing. This might sound cutthroat, but if you don't want Froscura involved, but she's willing to do it now, have her do a season, and then she'll help coach those other people to have a clue of what they're doing and pick up some things, and then you can transition the person out. We don't know what angle things will go in the end, but I just think maybe this was a scenario where they kind of thought of all this last minute, it felt like to me. Like they just decided within a very quick short of time, like, oh, we're just going to take over this, we're going to do this, we're going to do all this. It doesn't seem like this was a plan that was laid out 6 months ago and then was put into action 3 months and then there's 2 months out and we knew it doesn't have that kind of intelligence behind it, it feels like.
I mean, I agree with all these points. Now, just to give a little bit more, I guess, benefit of the doubt to the people who did end up making the decisions, to some extent to them, it probably would have felt a lot of times when you're making that final call to choose the lesser of several different evils, right? Because there's just so many interests that are going to overlap here for what you want, the production level you want, and then what you think your fans want. The list goes on. And I've helped deal with this at OGN too when I did a lot of the backstage work. It's just, when you have to make the final call, it's tough. But I do agree that I'm holding my reservations as if this was the most ideal way to try to cover as many circles of interest. But again, the decision has been made. It's going to happen. So by all means, I think the biggest thing is for the community is to give positive support in all aspects of it.
Well, I mean, but the thing is that while the decision's been made, we agree with the fundamental aspect of the decision. It's just like, it seems to me to be a no-brainer to get the experts who are already in the scene. You can the most ideal way is to merge what you already had with shinier production value.
Well, yeah. I mean, that can
it's
still
not that
happen.
complicated.
Yeah, that can still happen.
It may still happen. I don't know what's going on.
So again, I mean, that part we'll have to wait to see.
I'm also a bit pissed off because one of the things I looked forward to, like I enjoyed in the past, was the reason I used to like watching LPL is because I myself haven't been able to watch as much. I've done like a few articles, so for some things I've been able to do research, but I'm never going to watch like all of the week's LPL games and know what happened in the other games I didn't watch, so I need experts to give me that information. And crucially, this is an area where in the past Riot has already been deficient. Every single Worlds coverage has been terrible for the Chinese side because they never had an analyst on the desk who was a Chinese expert. Like we were saying here, some of the casters and analysts reach out to these players. Not all of them did, though. Some of them went to an event, a World Championship event, casted games and analysed games in quarterfinals, semi-finals, grand finals of the biggest tournament in the world without having done proper research. Even over a month's span of time to do research, they didn't do their job. And so, listen, if those people don't want to, I don't mind. Get someone else who can, though. You can't ignore. Like, this would be like the equivalent of if if there'd been some weird political reason as to why Korea had never had its own English casting. And so Korea was the best region in the whole world, and we didn't even have proper casters there. And then you bring people in, and you just bring in amateurs who are having to start over fresh, okay? They've never even covered the Korean scene. And so if you're a hardcore fan of the Korean scene, now you've got a guy telling you, like, I think Faker, he might pick Oriana here. I think I've seen him play it a few times on solo queue. Like, it'd be terrible. As a hardcore fan, the guy who loves it the most right now, you'd be almost a bit alienated, you know? So, unfortunately, we're going to have to get over it. But the transition period is going to be rough for everyone, I think.
Yeah, and you know, I think, for instance, we've seen, at least with OGN, right? That's the other group that I've worked closest with. What they do is, that's the main reason they put me on during the World Championship. They're like, okay, well, even if you haven't watched every LCS game now, you were there back in Season 2. You were there back in Season 1. And some of these players are still around. You know what they went through. You know their personalities. You've talked to them before. You've interviewed them as a journalist. And, you know, they're, by all means, having done a 5-man cast, it's not what you want from a production standpoint or a caster standpoint. 5 people shouting about the game is just not something you want during a live game. But the reason OGN has continued to, and I'm thankful that they've continued to ask me to join during global events, is they're like, well, hey, now we have to talk about American teams and European teams. And sure, we've watched the important games, we've analyzed them, and we might be able to do the game analysis. But man, when we're doing player introductions and team introductions, and we want to say, and if I say, well, I've seen them play this meta, and it looks like they played it in Season 2, you can be like, yeah, I watched that game back in MLG or something like that. And you feed that in. So I think it's quite obvious that there's a benefit to doing it by at least merging some portion of people who have been there. You don't have to make them the figurehead. You don't have to make them the iconic person who's going to lead your new production. But, you know, like both of you guys have been saying, you can't go back and regain that same level. You can only read and memorize the information. You can't reabsorb it as if you were there.
Okay, we've now reached the part of the show where only the truly faithful and loyal are still joining us at this point, or people who naively tuned in too late to the live aspect and are now like, shit, did I miss the part about Void Boy? Who even is SK Telecom? And like that part of the show. Yeah, it's Korea time. It's Korea time, guys. So over in Korea, the league hasn't even started. When I say the league, you're probably thinking, oh, you mean OGN Champions? No, you naive fool. Again, you're out of the loop. I mean LCK, you know, League Champions Korea, like whatever. First of all, what do you think of that name, Chobra?
Well, it's a lot more awkward to say than the old name, and I know this because I was recording, you know, the introduction. And I do that for Champions, and I did it again for this season. I got my script, and I was like, 2015 League of Legends Champions Korea. I'm like, wait, where does the spring go? Like, how do I enunciate this? It sounds awkward. The acronym's hard to say too. I guess the acronym looks fine when written, but LCK
it doesn't. Lick spring. Will you lick some spring, Chobra?
Well, I guess you put it that way. I guess there's nothing about it looks good, but I guess it has all the important parts in it, right? It's League of Legends, it's Champions, and it's in Korea. So, yippee!
Why can't we just call it OGN LOL Champions, which is its actual technical name?
So here, actually, I noticed this, I think it was in the first All-Stars, is that and you guys might remember this, is that all the players that were on the All-Star team, when it was just, you know, like a group of players that were voted in for the region's team, their team name were acronyms of the league.
It was LPL, it was LCS.
OGN for the first day, and then it was Korea for the second day.
I wonder if the Koreans just took over there. They were just like, they had a meeting. They were like, listen, we're going to dominate right now. Not for it, OGN. We're going to do it for Korea. And then they just joined together. And it was like, you know, like in those movies where it's like the first black swim team and they do it for like political reasons. Maybe it was like that, Chobra. It was like a political statement they were trying to make that Korea rules the world.
I think part of it now, from my
and then this year they'll be called Kesper so and so name.
I wish, you know, like Monty said, it's you know, OGN's production and it's OGN running the tournament. But I guess one aspect of Korea being in there that I can see is this is what I've noticed with the Team Liquid announcement too, is a lot of League of Legends fans haven't been following esports for a long time. A lot of people don't seem to really know that Team Liquid's been around for quite some time and very widely known in other titles. So the thing is, for those fans, you know, OGN may not hold meaning. I mean, so Korea being in there is fine, but then OGN still, I think it would have been nice. And an O, I think, just looks better and can sound better in a lot of titles and acronyms, but I guess that's just going into
your
aesthetics.
Personal idiosyncrasies. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yes.
Here's something that confuses me, though. It was even the perfect name, because the name of the league was Champions, and then coming into every Worlds, if you didn't follow it, you just knew that that's where the champions would come from.
That's true. Well, except for season 2, that was sad.
Nothing, Monty. Wow, tough crowd. Okay.
Yeah, Monty's been surprisingly quiet.
Maybe he's just wistfully thinking of the days when, you know,
that's right.
Riot wasn't in any way involved with his job. He was entirely independent. He used to be his own man, you know.
Well, Riot really, and I think that's a misconception, Riot really isn't involved in the English broadcast. What they're doing is just optioning the rights for the English language stream because they want to get everything on one channel, which I think is good. It's a good idea, you know? So that's all that's happening, is that nothing about the production is changing. It's still, the English stream is still produced by OGN. Doa and I are still contracted to on GameNet. Like, there's nothing shifting there, really.
You didn't get any of that dirty Riot cash, Monty?
Nope.
Still just on the old
Korean
one.
I do when they hired me as a freelancer for their events like All Stars and Worlds, but nothing about my job for OGN or the broadcasting of Korean League of Legends is changing in any conceivable way for me or Doa.
Am I still allowed to call you the best Riot caster to fuck with Jat on social media? Is that allowed by technicality?
It's not. I'm not a Riot caster.
Okay.
I'm my own.
So in that case, I just do it to fuck with you then, in that case. Okay, right. I've got it sorted then.
Okay, thank you.
So actually, I have one question though, and no one here will be able to answer it, but it's a question to Riot if they're watching the show, and we know they do. So whoever was watching from the show, when you made this announcement, there was no mention given anywhere in the announcement of what happens to all the VODs from OGN, because there's hundreds of VODs. Like, if you go on that channel, I think off the top of my head, there was something like 300 VODs of all the seasons, in English this is, going back to the winter season, which in 2012, which is the first one Monty casted. All those seasons worth of VODs currently are only on the Twitch channel, and you need the subscription to get them on the Twitch channel. So if people cancel their Twitch subscription now because they know that it's going to be free going forwards, do they still get access to those VODs? Will those VODs be put up on the YouTube channel? Do they have to keep their subscription going to get access to the old VODs? Like, that's actually something that needs clarification, because the history of the game is really important. And if we have these games and we have them cast in English, and we even have them in high quality, we can't just throw them away. You know, that's actually, to me, that's a really important topic as like a historian and wanting to go back and watch old games.
We know what's going to happen anyway.
Okay, what's going to happen, Chobra?
With the VODs, I mean, just as of our recording like an hour ago, OGN announced that the VODs from previous games are now open to everyone and will be accessible to all.
Okay, on the Twitch channel?
On the Twitch channel.
Okay.
Yeah, on the Twitch channel. So now we do have the result, but I do agree, obviously, at the time of the notice, this was a concern for some people, and I know you expressed it on social media.
I mean, no joke, Choba, I'm not joking. In the early hours of this morning was when my Twitch subscription updated. So if I'd have known that, I could have just like fucking cancelled it and not paid this month. But instead, I had to pay it, and I didn't cancel it because I didn't know whether it means I wouldn't be able to watch VODs for the next 2 months if I want to do an article, you know. So thanks, Riot. I want that $8 back now.
To be fair,
I demand restitution.
It's not just Riot, it's OGN.
No, it was a joke, Monty. I wasn't actually demanding the $8 be returned to me. They can keep the $8. I'm happy for you to have part of the $8, whatever you get, the 10 cents of it or something. See what I did there? Joke about China? No, you missed it all. Keep going anyway. So let's go and talk about China now, / Korea. So in Korea, we had the preseason, and now it was most recently announced the schedule of what's going to happen going forwards. Explain this to me, Choba, just from a cultural context. How is it possible that about a week out from a league starting, no one fully knows what the schedule is for said league? How is that possible, my friend?
Korea, maybe.
Yeah, you know what? The answer is Korea. There's no defense for it culturally. It's just that it happens in Korea, and it's not even it's not OGN. It's Korea. Like I listen to my friends who have worked at other businesses, other fields. Things are done very last minute, and things are finalized very last minute. Let's put it this way. And part of this, I know Monty's talked about this before, and I've talked about it too, is the way people speak in Korea. It's very roundabout for the first, however long, even if you're talking with your friend. A lot of times it'll be just very roundabout until the very last minute where you have to make your point, and then you make it. And so there's no defense for it. It happens, and people here are kind of used to it. They're used to also asking questions and not getting the answers right away. They'll just like leave their comment up. They'll be like, "Hey, when's this gonna coming out?" Okay, cool. I guess I'll find out the day of. And like they just wait around. So yeah, it's just the way it happens.
Aren't there gonna be like a fucking million games? Because it was announced here that it's a round robin, but it's played twice. You play each team twice, but it's a best of 3 every time. So isn't that gonna be like a billion games get played?
Potentially, yep. There's.
What do you mean potentially? There's pretty much a billion games because there are guaranteed 2 games per series, just like we had last season or all the other seasons in the 2-game sets. And so with each team playing each other team twice, that's 14.
Oh, I guess they're playing it twice. Yeah,
that's 14 best of 3s per team.
Although I do like, by the way, I prefer that system. Like, listen, I don't like regular season games, you know that. But I'd much rather it was a best of 3 where you play one game, you lose it. Okay, now you can adapt going to the next game.
I think it's good.
Now there's even a competitive aspect where if it goes 1-1, the 3rd game does become cooler. So I think it's even better in its own way than the best of 2 series scenario before. Monty doesn't, but I do.
I think I agree with what you're saying. I think from a broadcast perspective, though, it throws a lot more variables in terms of the length of the cast.
Oh, no, you're fucked, by the way. There's going to be days when it's going to be those 2 best of 3s that are 1 hour long each one. Yeah, good. Enjoy those.
Well, that's the thing.
And the 15-minute break between every game. Enjoy that one. You get your coffee ready, your double espresso shot.
And this is something that's come up now that we're talking about tournament system and schedule, is that I agree best of 3 is great. In some ways, from just a purely spectator standpoint, yeah, it can be more fun than the best of 2. But there's no going back. This is something that people have always argued, is that not having groups does dissolve a lot of storylines that developed because we had groups in OGN. And I am going to miss that. Not that there can't be storylines. I mean, LCS had storylines, but the storylines it's like a long time coming, but the punchline isn't as worth as the wait. And so I'm personally going to miss that. And that's something I learned a lot when I first came to OGN, is that they valued storyline a lot, and that's how you build up a community, and that's how you build up a tournament. And it's not like they purposely, intentionally force it. It's just, therefore, they design systems where that can happen naturally. And I don't think that's going to be the case with the new system necessarily, even with best of 3s.
Are you implying you don't want to watch Incredible Miracle play 14 best of 3s?
No. I'm totally fine with watching Incredible Miracle as many times as I want. But
the storyline is they still suck. Interesting. They lost again. Yep, and they're going to play someone else they've lost to. Yep, and they lost again. Finally.
I think that the upshot of it, though, is that at least a team like Incredible Miracle will have a lot more time to get better, because they're guaranteed 14 best of 3s instead of being guaranteed like 3 best of 2s every 3 months. Yeah, I mean that's pretty rough for a team that wants to develop players. So I do think that this will add some stability and help the players grow more and kind of become more accustomed to playing on stage in a professional setting, because there are a lot of players whose entire careers, like on Incredible Miracle, they played fewer games than like Blaze played in a single season.
Yeah.
Well, also, think about this, Monty. Think of the number of times that NaJin Sword had a good team by the end of NLB. Yeah. They would have probably kept that team if they'd have just had it for the first half of one of these seasons. They would have known it was good. Like, Helios might still be in fucking Korea right now. Like, Prey might still be playing, like, these lineups might exist.
Yeah, well, I think OQ was an upgrade off of Prey in the end, but...
Well, that's okay. The Tigers will show you that you are wrong, Monty. I have faith.
Will they?
Will they?
Yeah.
Hey, listen, you guys can place all your bets based on the fucking preseason where people were putting in random players to teams, and I'll just base them off blind, ignorant hope like a true fan, Monty. I don't need your fucking statistics, experience.
Is this where your love of Blaze has gone? Are you transferring your emotions into the GE Tigers, Duncan? Is Smeb your new favorite top laner?
It's not for the top lane. There's just something about the GE Tigers. I think it's because they've retained enough of the old players that I like, or know at least, whereas too many of the other teams are just brand new talents, So at least I can actually know what Prey's career was like, and I always thought that fucking Gorilla was a beast anyway, so I don't think they'll win, but I think they can be better than Monte believes. That's my feeling. And in many ways, that's all that matters, Monte. That they're better than you think. That's all that matters to me.
I have high hopes for that team too, and I actually give probably the most respect to that team for the exact reason you said, is that they retained old talent under a new banner and somewhat of a new formation of it too. But then they were able to at least show enough that they can stick around, and I think they'll make enough progress during the first season.
Like, I've no doubt that Gorilla must have got good offers from China, so he probably could have gone for sure, especially after some of his good games in Worlds. But so if he sticks around in this sense, I can understand why an SK Telecom star stays, because you probably still do get paid really well, and you're an SK Telecom, which is a really desirable organization to be part of. So if Gorilla sticks around and he's in a brand new team like this, and he's taking a big risk, he's even playing with an old star who people thought was washed up. If it works out, I think that's a really good storyline. I've got a lot of respect for him as a player,
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see.
So as this season starts, Monte, this incredible storyline, which we now need to wait for 14 chapters to unfold. So we're just going into the beginning of the story. We're in Hobbiton at the moment, and Bilbo hasn't left his house. There's going to be no action for this first part of the story. Now, based on the preseason, Monte, I know that you are all over those SK Telecom nuts, much like you were in the past, I believe. We've repeated a similar storyline, right? You think SK Telecom are going to be the best team. Just say it now, Monte. SK Telecom's going to win Worlds, aren't they?
I'm not sure about that. I wouldn't put a bet in for Worlds this early on, just because that has not been a pattern that we've seen really work. Because if I were to put in a bet right now in 2013 as to who would win Worlds, SK Telecom didn't even exist yet at this point in the year, and they went on to win Worlds. So I do think that SK Telecom is a big favorite, but it's a longer season this time. So by April and the playoffs arrive, who knows how that's going to go down. We could see a team on the rise who squeaks into the playoffs in third or fourth place, who actually just hits a hot streak or gets a lot better as the season progresses. But I think that probably SK Telecom is going to win spring. As to who will win summer, as more of these rookie players start to develop and as teams make trades during the off season between spring and summer, I don't really know.
What's your sense, Chobra? Who is the best team going to be from this area? Do you have someone you've already got something is pulling you towards?
I mean, again, going off of what we've seen, SKT is still probably the strongest in the sense that they're the most stable. I had high hopes for the new Samsung lineup, but that's...
Now, why in God's name would you do that? Please explain.
Okay, so, I'm like the stereotypical fan who's I love the underdogs, I love the underdog story, I love, new faces coming in, the young guys doing great. Somebody was my favorite player for a long time. I still love the guy.
Right? I ideologically hate you, Chobra, but keep going.
Something came in, he 1v1 MaKNooN, I was like, this guy, I'm looking forward to this guy in 2 years, and he's still around, so we'll see. But
what a depressing story that is, Monte. He saw someday 1v1 MaKNooN, and he was like, this is my guy, I'm going all in on him for the next 2 years. Okay, Chobra.
In all realism, I think Samsung's play has been, for obvious reasons, lackluster. I can't put my finger on any one team. I can put teams that I've been very disappointed about, like CJ, who they've really been the team that I've loved since the beginning.
There's
but
no hope for them.
I don't even know what to say about CJ. I do think KT has some hope than perhaps newer fans of Korea may think. Just if they're we don't know some of these names, or if they haven't watched Korean League of Legends. I think, just given the players and hearing what other players think about them, having worked with them on different teams, I think KT maybe has one of the best upshots from going up from here. Gnar is also one of those teams that was... They were the potential team, right? They always picked up these players that seemed to have potential, and they seemed to have an eye for newer talent and things like that, but they never got it to work, so not sure how they're going to go through. But and then, like I said earlier, the GE Tigers, the fact that they've made something work with some veterans and some relatively newer pros, I think we'll have good hopes. And I'm excited to see what Nofe does with that team, and now with Konkui, having talked with Nofe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, also, we also... Okay, people may be confused about this as well, but there isn't a roster lock right now for the Korean teams. So they may still be acquiring players. They probably will be, because they have to flesh out their rosters to 10 players.
Do we know when the roster lock is?
It hasn't been announced.
I mean, you wouldn't announce it before the league starts, you know? Why would you?
Why would you do that? As long as, but for right now, until they get into the challenger scene, it doesn't matter if they have more than 5 players. And also the rosters that were put on that have been floating around are not entirely accurate. For example, and I don't feel bad about saying this, but Sky from Xenix is in Gnar now, and he wasn't on that list. And why I don't feel bad saying this is because during the last preseason match, he was in the studio in a Gnar uniform. And if you're going to walk around a studio in a Gnar uniform, whatever. Like,
advanced mind games, Monty.
Like paying him to wear it just to play mind games.
Yeah.
So Sky is, I think, a talented up-and-coming top laner, and he was also the shot caller on Xenix. So I think he may be able to add some extra spice to Gnar. And I think GBM was getting a lot better as the preseason progressed as well. By the end, I think he was playing quite well. So,
see, that's the problem. You said, I'm pretty sure you were one of the guys where when we were discussing the potential of combining the sister teams, you were saying that Gnar had a chance to be really good. I imagine after seeing them in the preseason that like Captain Jack gets on the phone, because you know whenever Lord Loco posts those pictures of him and all the MiG players he always meets up with when he goes back to Korea, I imagine that he gets on the phone. Okay, Captain Jack, he calls up Flame. He says, Flame, this new team I'm in, like I'm playing really well. Like I'm playing on top of my level, but all my teammates are underperforming. And Flame just goes, "Now you know how I feel, motherfucker." Just hangs up on him right there. That's how I imagine it goes.
Captain Jack, and also Gnar was like not using Captain Jack. They used him like 50% of the time or something like that. And we only saw Faker like 50% of the time, and we never really saw what I presume will be NaJin's starting roster tonight, right, which is with. We didn't see much OQ, so we'll see. There are still so many factors as to what the teams will actually put as a starting roster. Now that said, they are allowed to substitute players game to game.
Yeah, so that's the spinoff here.
Even in a best of 3, they can sub players like multiple times every game.
So you could see a different 5-man team for all 3 games, and I think that will be interesting for teams who do have subs that are very kind of easier to fit in. And with Gnar, I think talking about it, I guess what I said earlier feeds right into the fact that the new system could benefit that team. Like you said, GBM has always shown potential, and players and coaches have said this guy's potential. That's why he's still around. But he also didn't get the chance to play too many games, continuously at a professional level in the studio, and now he's going to get that. So I'm excited to see how that runs through for him.
What I find interesting about this is that so far the teams which look like they're going to be the better ones are actually the organizations which historically have had a lot of the success. So SK Telecom, NaJin, KT, and yet 2 of the ones who look like they're in deep shit are ones. CJ, historically, obviously one of the most famous ones, they're in a lot of trouble. And then Samsung, the problem with the Samsung one is that's misleading. It looks like they were a great organization because of the 2 teams, but a lot of that came as a result of the miracle MVP Ozone team that they acquired later, because even Dade obviously switching off to Blue was the big factor to make them really good. So I wonder what happens to organizations like Samsung and CJ if a whole league like this is played. Remember, in the old Champions, people used to go apeshit in terms of organizations with how strongly they'd react to a single best of 2 loss that had a big impact on how your season went. If Samsung and CJ play 14 best of 3s and finish in like the bottom 3 of this league, this will be like earth-shattering stuff for organizations like this, especially CJ, who historically are considered to be, they're supposed to be good still, Samsung at least have new players.
CJ didn't. Yeah. They fired their coach, so they're obviously trying to make changes. Fired one of their coaches.
I'm so bitter it's unreal. That's when people say I'm salty, but I'm only really salty about anything to do with Flame and the ruining of his career. So like Ambition, he used to be one of my favorite players. Now I like wish death upon him and have a voodoo shrine. Well, I've already managed to get him to go to the jungle and ruin his own career, so that's worked. Syncretic magic actually does work, Monty. What else? Unfortunately, I've been unable to kill Space still, so I actually presume he doesn't have a soul and that he's in fact some sort of Gola. He's sort of like a ghost entity that just walks the world, but with no actual soul, because nothing I do can stop this guy. I don't know what it is.
Spoiler, Space is actually Kane.
But, I think the other thing for me, just looking at this and having watched, the preseason, Yeah, like you said, it really does feel like it's the first chapter of The Hobbit, where I don't think I've ever been this not excited about watching Champions games. You know, the league starting up again as a fellow caster and, you know, as someone who's helped the backstage, who has helped with translation. That's all exciting. But then I look at the rosters, I'm like, oh, I'm really looking forward to this matchup. I'm like, I'm really looking forward to seeing if they change over the season or not. But I guess, you know, the opening matchup, obviously SKT versus NaJin, it's one of the most remaining rosters from last season. That's fine. But I will say I don't have my excitement up yet, but again, the season's longer, and by the end, that's what I'm looking forward to, is will these new names really change anything? And there's been talk in the Korean community and among the Korean casters too, it is too early to judge, but it really now relies on, okay, well, they got new names. It's clear that there's talent in solo queue. Can they really create a difference though? Because if not, and then let's say at some point, like, okay, Faker's still great, but at some point he's going to hit a limit, right? He's not going to be keep on improving. Yeah, he gets older. I'm sorry. Like
someone take that section, translate it into Korean, and post it on Invent right now. Let's get this fake Korean the fuck out of here.
When that time comes, and the new players haven't made as big of a splash, that's the biggest concern for me, and I don't think it will happen, but. That's what I'm holding my reservations for the new Korean League and the new teams and the new players. And like you said, for CJ, yeah, I mean, they really still have some of the older generation players, and they still have a massive fan base in Korea, but how will they react if they finish last? I'm actually not so sure.
I actually echo your concerns in as much as this. Like, listen, I know Monty's the caster, so I don't know how much he can actually really say about this, but the big problem I have with the league now is that losing all the stars to China, first of all, it's already made me more excited to watch LPL because I know those star players. I know that some of them are still in their prime, you know. But crucially, when I think historically of the league, it's not that they won't develop talent, but if I think at the rate that they used to develop talent before, what used to happen was a godlike top level player, usually the span of their career in OGN would be about a year, even the best players. Now that's actually what makes people like Mata, etc. even more impressive, that they've lasted like 2 years. And that's why I have a lot more respect even for those guys, because those guys have sort of transcended just even being a normal star in the normal sense, you know. But in general, that would be roughly when even the top stars would start to fall off over the next couple of seasons. And if you're a really great player, maybe it takes 2 seasons to fall off, but eventually you're going to fall off. During that time, it's not that like 10 guys just come up and replace you, but usually my rate is I think every season you get maybe 1 or 2 players at each position who are getting into position to become really good. And if, like, so for example, Gorilla came up slowly, Save came in, we had a bunch of different players gradually come into these positions. We had like Rookie, but you never really got like 10 people coming in one season and suddenly be the best players. So listen, if we took the same rate now, then I've no doubt that we'll get a couple of people who by the end of this season, especially being such a longer season, you know, will be at the level of like a Cacao type guy. It's definitely possible. But the problem is there won't be as many for the lack of the stars before. So to me, it's going to take like 2 seasons to get to have a really strong talent pool in that sense, you know. So I'm a bit worried for the first season, in as much as I think a lot of it will be like whoever the great players are, kind of just shitting on everyone else. I've got to say, if Faker doesn't absolutely run through the mid laners in this season, it would make me ask questions about his legacy, you know, because the people he's playing as just are not on his level. He should destroy them, except for like jungle pressure and all that shit, you know. What do you think, Monty?
Oh, I completely agree. I think that what's going to happen in Korea is that we're still going to have great performances, and we should have a good finals this time. But this is going to be the great weeding of talent. With so many rookies in the scene, we're really going to see the cream rise to the top. And I think that players like Fury and Wraith will like look really good, and then, you know, some of these other players who can't compete or can't hold their own at the top level will be weeded out, and they'll have to find some new talent for the summer season. Or, you know, we'll start seeing teams like fill out those 10 players and then figure out over the course of the season which of those 5 players are going to be the starting roster. And so I assume that it'll be a bit up and down this season, maybe not quite as competitive. But I think by summer, teams are going to figure that shit out. And by the time Worlds rolls around, there's going to be another very strong field coming in from Korea. Also possible that between spring and summer, perhaps even earlier, that some of these players in China may come back due to them being unhappy with their teams, or maybe they can't play in the LPL directly, or there are too many like Koreans on a team, so they're not even getting like starting time. That's like a big problem between like Acorn and Flame right now, which is super weird.
One side of that is a real problem. I agree. One of those players like is trying to get playing time. He should know his fucking role. It's not good. Make way for the king.
Well, we'll see how it works, but I do think that this will be kind of a trial season for a lot of players, and it will be fun to watch because we're really going to see the new Kings of Korea emerge in this season, and we should see some very exciting development from players. And there's stuff that I'm really looking forward to. Like, I'm really looking forward to seeing more of Score's jungling. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to Fury and Wraith. I'm looking forward to seeing Sky if Gnar starts to play him. So there's a lot that I really want to see.
Like, I don't know if you saw, Monty, but the LGD is actually going to do an AMA. Like, I think it might even be today or something. It's very soon. Right? They're going to do an AMA on Reddit in English, and so presumably it'll be translated. And so I plan on going on there, Monty, and I'm going to address a question, and it will say to Acorn, "Who the hell do you think you are?" Like, and I just want someone to translate it to him, like foreign journalist says, like, and then just read out my whole speech, in which I will attempt to get him to do the honourable thing.
And going off of what Monty said, I should put that out there that I'm speaking, and I'll relate to a lot of people who have watched League of Legends, but for some people who are in Korea, rather, for some people who are newer to Korean League of Legends, it's not going to apply. But I'm speaking as someone, who I still have memories of, even people like Reaper and, like you said, Flame and these players. And I'm going to miss that because I entered in the beginning and it was just there and it kept building up on itself. And it's a new start. And
Chobra will always miss Reaper, but he'll always be, we'll always have the spring season of 2012. We'll always have the IEM tournament in Cologne.
Yep.
For the true believers, we'll always have those. And now apparently I can go and watch the VODs for free on Twitch. So go and do that, people.
Yeah. So, I have to say it's a very personal thing that I'm saying is that I'm going to miss that. By all means, I agree with Monty that I'm excited to see how things flesh out. And if they do bring on more players, for instance, like Samsung, they only have 5 players listed, and that's what they played with during the preseason. Well, who else will they look to? So I think, in some ways, for people who didn't get a chance to really get into Korean League of Legends, that's actually a great time because now you can pick out your favorite players from the ground up and build up your own fan base and community around that from globally, than just kind of feeding off of what the Korean fans had prepared for you.
Chobra, if you had to culturally guess, I've got a question for you, okay? So MaKNooN just failed to qualify for LCS in America. So presumably he's going to come back to Korea. It said that he's left Fusion. So I had someone ask me, like, what are the odds that he just goes to OGN? Because I guess as a Westerner, they're thinking, well, there's not that many star names, maybe a team would want him. I said to the person, like, my guess would be that since he didn't have the best reputation in terms of, like, organizations, like, I said I would assume they wouldn't even try him. Like, they'd just think, we'll just try a solo queue guy who doesn't have anything potentially against him. He doesn't have a black mark in any sense. Do you have a similar sense? Do you think, is there even a chance someone like MaKNooN or some old star would come back into the league, you think?
Not even just MaKNooN, but I actually, so when we say old stars, like the first generation players, right, who are still kind of roaming about, whether globally.
I mean, one that still wants to be Aquad, not like one who's literally never played a game since,
Especially in terms of MaKNooN, I do agree with you. I love the guy, but, and there's a reason, and let's make this very, there's a reason that MaKNooN was one of the most loved players in the West. That alone should let you know that there's going to be natural conflicts with MaKNooN and other Koreans. That's the culture gap. The way that if he can speak so naturally to what foreign fans want and what the foreign community is, and if he's so loved by them, there's going to be a conflict in the Korean community. And
why do you keep saying it like that, though, Chobra? You're like, if someone's particularly loved by the West, we don't want any part of that, quite frankly.
No, I'm not
what? What are you implying here?
Okay, let me rephrase that. Is that
Korea just exists as an anti position to the West, like atheists to religious people don't. Okay,
is that what speaks to you is very different, and that's why a lot of Korean players, fans in the West, and myself too, were like, stop saying the same thing in interviews. Stop saying, "Oh, thanks for cheering us. I'll try harder." But that's what speaks a lot to Korean fans. But of course, we've had Korean players who can trash talk a little bit, and that's been fun in Korea too. But it's also just the way you go about it. There's very small nuances that speak differently to different communities, and MaKNooN, you know, the way he acted, also just talking to different players and coaching staffs, is that, you know, a lot of people like the guy as a person, but to work with him as a player is a different story, and that's the same for any player. And they've found some difficulties in doing that, and I think that's one of the reasons why the original NaJin story succeeded, was because that team was built purely around MaKNooN, and so he could make it work. You know, he was given a second chance by the NaJin organization. Hey, all right, we trust in you as a player, but it seems like you need to do your own thing. So tell us what kind of team you want, and they built it up. And NaJin Sword did great. Black Sword did great. So I don't really see MaKNooN being integrated into any of the teams now. And if I were MaKNooN himself, and having spoken to him in the past, I don't think he would necessarily want to start like a new amateur team in Korea to try to get back into OGN either.
I mean, isn't it also the case that this is like a similar scenario to what happened with INSEC? It's not necessarily that they didn't have the skill to still be on a team, but first of all, in game they're kind of wild guys. Like they're not restrainable. They're not going to work within a system. You kind of have to base everything around what they want to do. And then as people, it sounds like there's an aspect of that within their personality. You know, they're not as, maybe they don't go along with everything. Maybe they're more argumentative, whatever it is. Whereas, I mean, that's another thing about being a Korean team. Like, you have to be willing to fit into that structure and have your curfew, and it's pretty hardcore, right?
Right, and the other thing is also strategy-wise, it's not just on the player and the coaching staff being in disagreement, but the game itself has changed so much. And this is what we saw. The reason CJ started going on a downfall is because they still relied only on one set of strategies for each team.
Yeah.
And you just can't do that against a team like SKT.
Let the top laner carry, everyone get the fuck out the way.
Right, like
AD carry, don't die. It's a great strategy, Chobra. What's wrong with that?
You can't do that, and some people have noticed that with the way MaKNooN played on Fusion, is that there were very glaring weak points, and in MaKNooN's play, the parts he's good at, he's still one of the best, but then there are very glaring weak points, and to cover that up, you'd have to build a strategy around that. But then a team like, again, SKT T1 will just be like, we can play any strategy we want, so we'll just play the one that counters yours. Okay. Game over. And that just can't work in the League of Legends scene in general anymore.
Let's do a little hypothetical challenge. I don't even know why I said hypothetical there. Let's just do a challenge here, okay? What we'll do is, if we were naming the all-star team for Korea now, we'll try and figure out at each position who is the best player right now. So who is the best top laner in Korea right now?
Right now.
Duke or Marin, probably.
Yeah, I want to say Marin, but I think, again, it's been so short that Marin's shined now with the preseason. Like before that, he had trouble adapting.
And he is only playing with the best player of all time on his team as the main threat. You know,
I think I would give it to Duke, but
I guess in that sense maybe. But Marin or Duke, yeah.
Jungler, who's the best jungler? This is going to be hard for you, by the way, because this is one I was thinking about the other day. Who the fuck is the best jungler?
I actually don't know.
Jungle's the hardest.
Who do you even hazard a guess at, Monty?
Say Ambition.
By the way, Monty, just as a side note, I once made this joke in the past, but you know, Westerners who come from a sports writing background always try to pressure us that we should use surnames in Western esports. Like we should call you like Michaels instead of Monte Cristo, okay? I've always said, that's all well and good, guys, but you get ready for a fucking nightmare when you go into China and Korea and try and do that, because like 20% of people are called Lee, and I'm sure in China it's like Lee like with an I. Well, you know, there's a team, I can't remember which one it is, I think it was like KT or something. No, it might be NaJin, where apparently 5 of their players have the surname Lee. Like, good job with that. Let's see you cast that game, motherfucker. Like, So, okay, which jungler are we going to pick here?
I think you just default has to
go to score, yeah.
Bengi, I guess. Like, I
don't know. Oh my god, that's how far we've come, Monty. Bengi is the best jungler again.
He did play really well in the preseason, to be fair to Bengi.
Okay. So he's got the history, I guess. We have to give it to him then. Jesus Christ. I never realised how low we'd come, Monty. Bengi is automatically the best jungler.
Junglers have really changed.
It's pretty bad. Unfortunately, like the unfortunate thing is that Chaser, who was doing really well in summer, kind of fell off really hard. Because otherwise, I think if he had continued on that arc of progression that he may have, we may have been having him in the conversation, but he really is not playing at the same level he was in summer. And like Score's too new. I just don't have enough information. Score has played well in the games that I've seen him in, but there's not enough info.
But I guess if we're going with part history and most recent, Bengi is the most sensible, just because
he did play really well.
What about Watch? He has been to all of the World Championships, Chobra.
I almost defaulted to Watch, but at the same time, Bengi's played better most recently. And while Bengi had a slump, I think given his history, you can give him the benefit of the doubt with that.
Mechanically, he's looking really good right now too. So
Watch, I would say, has never been in a slump. He's just been hit or miss a lot of times.
Well, the trick to not being in a slump, Chobra, is you have to be good to go into a slump afterwards. If you just never become good, it's set your low expectations. That's what Watch has done. With Watch, you expect him to look really pretty and to come top lane whenever commanded to, and so he's able to fulfill those requirements still. Okay, what about mid lane? Now pause. Remember, we have to think really hard here. I want a lively discussion here. I want back and forth. I don't want any biases involved. So, Chobra, who would you pick for the mid lane? Who do you think?
I mean, Faker.
Well, what if he hits that level, though? Maybe the Samsung mid is going to overtake him this season. Like you were saying, Faker hits that level. Samsung mid just keeps improving.
Okay, if that were to come, I don't think it's going to come from Bliss. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And I tried really hard because I love putting out talk of potential. I know that's not what you like, but I love putting that out there. But obviously, Faker still does reign supreme.
Who's going to challenge him though? Who could actually potentially have the 6th season where then they can be in this conversation at least?
After what we talked about previously, going into summer, I'd like to see if GBM can stand up to that.
Jesus Christ! Now we're also coming down to Monty hoping Ganked by Mom is going to become the best
after a
mid laner.
Season of round robins.
He has looked significantly better over he has had quite impressive improvement over the course of the preseason. And it's funny too, I had lunch with the EG guys who were here. So I was talking to Pull Belter and I was saying, hey, how your scrim's going? He's like, we've been scrimming against some of these Korean teams. And I was like, okay, well, you've played against Kuro a little bit. They've gotten a few scrims. You played against Kuro a little bit. You played who else did he play? Oh, he played against Goong a little bit. And I was like, how'd you do? He's like, I did pretty well. I did well against, Goong. I did well against Kuro. You know who kicked my ass? GBM. I was like, what? Really? He's like, yeah. GBM put me in the dumpster. I was like, interesting.
See, I prefer that story if you didn't have the part where he said that he'd done well against Goong and Kuro, and it's just that the headline is Ganked by Mom puts Pobo in the dumpster, because to me that's the storyline I want to know about.
GBM, even when he was on CJ, the way he just accepted that he's the rookie, he's going to learn, and having seen him practice and the way he talks about the game, that's why I still want to give him the shot. And again, let's try to remember that he's also one of those players that never got to play too many games in the booth. He on CJ he definitely didn't, and on Gnar, they never really got the chance to go too far. So again, that's why I'm saying if we play the full first spring season, after that I would actually give it to GBM, because Goong, quite frankly, I don't think can necessarily improve like another huge tenfold.
No, I think he's in quantity.
That's his cap, and
he's good though.
He's good, and I respect him a lot. But again, let's be real. It's that he is also one of the oldest players now, and he's talked about that, sometimes hitting his limit too, and especially in mid lane. Yeah, it's gonna matter, especially if you're going up against Faker, who just kind of has everything memorized in the palm of his hands. So Goong, I don't see that. Kuro, I liked when he was first on IEM, but he just hasn't really been able to go with the meta and really improve much on that end. And NaMei, I think, is somewhat similar too, where actually I don't think NaMei's really shown that much potential. He's just been a decent mid all through and through.
Well, he peaked like in 2013 at Worlds, and
he got the kills against Faker, and it was like yay, and then that was
then nothing happened after that. I think the player we should talk about though is Bliss in the mid lane too. That's another guy who is looking really strong. Solo killed Faker, has had big games for Samsung. So
is that what OGN's going to be this season? Who gets the most solo kills? They shouldn't even. They should, like, obviously the MVP award goes to Faker anyway. So there should be a secondary KDA award for KDA against Faker. That should be like the second award for mid lane.
Sitting there, and he's like, "Oh damn, I got the wrong time. I could have gotten the most like award money."
By the way, what a great fuck you it would be also if Gnar places above CJ with ganked by Mob and Captain Jack. That's just like, well done, CJ, well done.
And quite frankly, this is a little bit, but I'm excited to see if Captain Jack actually can improve more, because he's stuck around for a long time, and when he first entered Gnar, he seemed to have picked himself back up a little bit than his last games at CJ. So we'll see how he does on the Green Wings this season.
Well, I mean, if he can cleanse himself of the stenk of this bad Gnar team, and then he can find the lust for the game again, then oh boy, he could be an ambitious player, I believe, who could flame, like, whatever, I'm just going to keep going. Like, I couldn't figure out a way to get Helios in there at the end, but that's because Helios doesn't matter. I hope you're hearing that, Helios. Have someone translate it for you, my friend. So, let me think of other teams. So, okay, Monty doesn't believe in the HUYA Tigers.
No, I didn't say that at all, dude.
I'm putting words in Monty's mouth that he doesn't believe in the HUYA Tigers. I'm like quick shot at this point. So Monty, I know you don't know about Janna or the fact that she's a viable champion. You're like, whoa, no. Yeah, okay. So what do you think of HUYA Tigers?
I think HUYA Tigers will be top 4, probably. I think they're coming along. I think Prey still has a ways to go to get back into his old form. I think Smeb really needs to learn how to not play carry tops, and that he's so much of a part of the GE Tigers right now because he's like absorbing 3 bans in a game and stuff like that. So the other players need to find ways to get a little bit more threatening. Like, nobody seems to care about Kuro's champion pool. Nobody seems to care about Lee's champion pool. And surprisingly, nobody seems to care about that much about Gorilla's champion pool when you can get 2 to 3 top lane bans. So they need to get it together a bit, and I think
maybe Smeb is my new favorite player. He's living that life already.
Yes.
But yeah, Smeb needs to, I think, the biggest hurdle for GE is Smeb being able to be more threatening on tanks so that those bans are kind of wasted, and that opens up opportunities for the rest of the team.
So who is the best AD carry in Korea at the moment? By the way, this is a depressing one, because think about all the talent China has right now in AD carry. Now, who the fuck is the best Korean AD carry?
I think it's one of the more interesting ones.
OQ probably.
Yeah, I was going to say OQ too, even if obviously Fury has sparked a lot as a rookie. But I think OQ out of the ones we have right now strikes a good balance of...
Well, Fury's not a rookie. He was on Prime. He played this season of Champions.
True. Very true. But OQ, I think, strikes the best balance of, being more of a team-oriented AD carry versus like a solo star player. I think OQ probably fits that balance the best out of the ones we have right now.
And just in terms of, I remember when CLG was playing in Korea, and going back to we were talking about Doublelift and Aphromood laning earlier in the broadcast, and I know that they had the most trouble in lane against OQ and Kane. Like, Doublelift Afro said, man, these guys are really great at laning. We like playing against them. It's really hard. And then OQ also is just like a team fight carry as well. He's a very exciting player to watch, and I can't wait to see some more of him. Now, I don't think the AD carry situation is as desperate as you think it is. I think Captain Jack is playing very well right now. I think Fury is looking good. People overrate Bang. Bang is there just to clean up. Like, it's easy to play carry on SK Telecom as long as you have a stable laning phase right now, because Mard and Faker draw so much pressure, and everybody just tries to kill Faker in team fights. So all Bang has to do is stand there. Nobody shoots any skill shots at him. He just stands there like autoing you on Tristana. It's like pentakill. I was like, I could have gotten that pentakill.
But be that as it may, China AD carry position compared in depth to Korea, it's pretty big disparity.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you put it in relativity,
that position especially is really super deep, because China already had all these talented AD, and then you add in the best Korean ones. It's no contest there. Okay, so the support position, who is the best support in Korea?
Gorilla has to be mentioned. Wolf is also very good.
Is that it? Does anyone even know the name of another support in Korea, Monty?
Well, Wraith is looking pretty outstanding in laning phase right now. He's made some very good plays, and he's really helped Samsung win a lot of team fights. So Wraith is looking pretty sick right now too, I'd say.
What about my men, Chobra?
Yeah, you know, MadLife and even the Korean fans, as much as they still like him, there's just... Isn't this
season going to be the one that's the death of MadLife? If against this lower competition he doesn't shine, it's hard to make excuses anymore, right?
Yeah, and the team can keep him, but
he's been playing really badly.
Yeah, the fans, you can't even keep up just the image anymore if you don't win. Again, it's similar to Doublelift changing perhaps his persona a little bit. It's just MadLife can't be that mysterious figure anymore, and also the fact of the matter is he's also maybe. In a strategic move to continue keeping his fan base, he's appeared a lot more on other programs with OGN and doing other interviews. And so that image itself has already been broken down in Korea. So now you just need results to bring it back up. But I don't really see that happening. And I do think this could very well be the last season of MadLife if the results don't skyrocket for CJ.
I actually think that MadLife may be put out before this season. I think CJ's getting pretty desperate there, and MadLife played very poorly throughout the preseason.
Of all the things CJ's done, I've always acted with a level of restraint, a level of respect for the organization and the other players. If they kick MadLife out of the team before Space, I'll come back to Korea and I will riot, motherfucker. I will destroy CJ, the multinational corporation. I will take the entire chaeboard down for what they have done to my favorite players.
Yeah, obviously it'd be equally depressing if CJ keeps MadLife and Space only for another 1 or 2 years. That'd just be odd too. But yeah, I don't really see much. The thing I actually want to ask is for both of you guys is Era and Hachani, right? They were kind of star players. Obviously they won in the summer, but Hachani also has just gotten a lot of praise for certain champions. But then he also seems to just still be at that place where it's oh yeah, he can play these ones really. He can make those big plays, but then it's not consistent enough. And I wonder if you think that can change with KT Rolls or with the new lineup.
I don't know. I think that KT is entirely dependent on Score's ability to shot call. And if he can select engages for Hachani, then perhaps that can change. But what probably won't change is Hachani face-checking brushes by himself. Because that's an individual decision that he makes, sometimes very poorly. He's such a hit or miss player. He's like the most random in terms of will his performance be good or bad player I feel in the entire league. So I think KT's so hard to read, but I think that Score is going to turn out to be probably one of the better junglers in Korea, just from what we've seen already. Yeah. And really, for me, there's not a lot of difference mechanically in watching Prime versus Score. But when I watch games that Score plays in for KT, when they were playing in the preseason, their shot calling and decision making was worlds better when Score was in the jungle. So I think him being a veteran, him being a part of this, this very tactical, old school KT Bullets team, I think he has a good mind for it, and we'll see if he can kind of live up to expectations, because for me it's all about Score's performance for KT.
The most depressing thing about the whole MadLife drop off is that it's okay if you go on a date with a beautiful woman, initially all you see of her is the image. You just see the way she presents herself, the makeup, the way she holds herself, she laughs at a certain joke, maybe she says a line that says something in context now, but maybe it hints at more, an intelligence and intellect behind the eyes. You think to yourself, wow, the mystery of this is so alluring. The image that I'm presented with, I want to know more. I want to pierce that veil and find out what lies behind it. But sometimes you wake up the next day and you see her with just some old sweatpants on, and she's drinking some coffee, and the makeup's maybe it's not been taken off properly, and the hair's all messy, and then she's reading Us Weekly magazine about Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston, and suddenly it's not that she's not still attractive or doesn't still have some value. It's the problem is the allure of the mystique has gone. You know, that great mystery, that wonderful thing, like something that seemed incredible, that hinted at more, is gone. And so with MadLife, I remember the days, Chobra, where MadLife was this character who he was like, it's like he wasn't even real. He was like a legendary sort of character, like Hercules or something, where apparently, you know, the reason he was so good at skill shots was he'd actually coded a version of League of Legends himself that allowed other players to control minions, which he would fire blitzcrank hooks through. Like he'd actually hacked the Matrix. And then also he had like timers on every single champion cooldown in the whole world, and he could, like, off the top of his head, like Rain Man, you could like throw 10 champions on the floor and he would just tell you like 1087 is when, like, well, that's not even a fucking time. How did I fuck that up? Like 1047, like that's like the time he would say, and that's when you would have to go in, and that's exactly when the timers would have just come out, and then he would kite within the range of it, and the mystique was incredible, right, Cho? But he was so good. People literally, these stories sounds like a joke to modern people. These were things we actually believed in the West because he was so good. It was inexplicable how good he was, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I was just about to say, you know, think back. I think it was the first time, I can't put the year on it, but I think it was the first time Pandora sponsored Champions. But there was the OGN intro where it was very, you know, sci-fi, cyber-esque, and then right at the end, just like boom,
MadLife was he was the final boss, right?
Yeah, it comes out in those neon lights, and that was MadLife. It was like, oh man, center spotlight. We can't really understand how to play against, because we don't understand how he plays so well as fans. And you're right. And you know, he used to say, you know, I do know the timers, and then his teammates used to say, yeah, he just rattles things off for us in the booth. I mean, it's been a while since we've even hear his teammates say that anymore about his play, let alone see it ourselves in a match. And it is kind of depressing. And you know, when you mentioned that it's going to sound like a joke to some people, that's actually really sad, because it is going to sound like a joke to some people, and you can't blame them, because people who have only watched the most recent games of MadLife, they'll have no way of believing that that's who he was at some point.
Did he actually fall off, like, mechanically? Because that used to be one of his prime qualities, obviously.
Yeah, no, he's definitely fell off
in every category.
I will say this, is that, you know, when I talk to whether his former teammates or even other players who have been close with him since the first generation, you know, they're just like, even in scrims and practices, we don't really see the same spark in him anymore. You know, it's just, you know, he plays, like, he's a good player. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about he has a mind for League of Legends. But, you know, is that a result of just a burnout? I mean, who knows? He has been around for a long time. You know, he did have a good prime, but it's still sad, of course, especially as fans, to see that, and to see that just kind of being dragged out, and for a lot of people, you know, and then having to see him play with space for all this time, and maybe, you know, if only maybe he had an AD carry with more vigor and just, you know, that was hungrier for the trophy, maybe that would bring him back too. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but I think the bottom line is, unless the team as a whole, and he contributes to it, just skyrockets in results, there's just not much hope for MadLife.
Oh, I know. I know you're friends with Coach Sun, who is one of the coaches, the former Blaze coach, who's still coaching as part of the organization. So spill it. What do you know? What does Coach Sun tell you?
Oh, well, so to be very honest, I haven't spoken to him recently, very recently, partly just because ever since CJ went on a very clear downfall, I was very afraid to contact him in a friendly manner and be like, hey, like, how's your team doing? You want to grab dinner? That's not a conversation I want to have with him at that point. But you know, when I speak with him too, a lot of times, and I guess, yeah, this part I'd be happy to share is that a lot of times, you know, fans would get just very upset at the CJ coaching staff, but CJ and just as a whole is also known to run things a little differently, whether it's how they divide up coaching staff, or, you know, what they focus on, how they divide up who's going to start and things like that, compared to the other organizations in Korea, sometimes to their merit, sometimes not. And so for him, he was oftentimes he would have a tough time, because he was like, well, obviously as a coach, especially when they were Frost and Blaze, he would say, I want to focus on these aspects, but that, you know, I can't just do that. And while they did have 3 coaching staffs at the time, you know, they had 2 teams, and head coach Kang, he was really just kind of managing the entire organization of CJ and just League of Legends. So it was, in some sense, CJ was just one coach for one team. And so, you know, he did express just a lot of hardships with that. And when it comes to the older generation players, Yeah, he you know, he would often express that, you know, it was tough because sometimes if they feel a little burnt out, it's hard to push them because they've been in the CJ team house for so long, and some of them since the MIG days when they used to just cram into one room and practice, and now they're like, well, now we don't get the results anymore, and obviously that's on us, but to have to like build that back up, and this not coming from Coach Sun, but some of the former teammates, you know, a lot of them would say sometimes these players, they still kind of live in the past, right? Where we were the prime, we were the leading team in Korea, and maybe it's tougher to accept for some of them that they have to kind of start from the bottom up again. But you know, you can't blame them. But at that point, then that probably means your career is just gonna mark its end sometime very soon.
There was one more piece of news that I forgot, but this is actually from China. This is one that I forgot, Monty. Apparently, NaMei has left DDG, and the rumor is he's going to join Starhorn Royal Club. So he's going to say, okay, Uzi, you took everything from me at Worlds. Like, I'm going to now join your old team. I'm going to play with Zero. And there was a great drama post where someone had a screenshot of Zero's chat box, and Uzi messages him like, hey. And he's like, hey. You know, like a girlfriend and boyfriend who just broke up. And he's like, do you want a duo? And he's like, I can't. I'm duoing with someone else right now, and it was NaMei. So it's a great moment right there. It's worthy of a Korean drama, right, Chobra?
Yeah, that's really good. I'd love to set it up for OGN. We're just gonna go into the K-drama scene now with that one.
And what would you think of that team, Monty? So imagine this world where NaMei plays with Zero, and he's gonna have Insec as his jungler. What would you think of that team?
I'm skeptical, actually, because the thing is that NaMei is very stylistically different than Uzi, and I think the reason why Starhorn Royal Club worked so well was because they had this all-in mentality, and without the follow-up on Insect's engages from Uzi, I don't know exactly how that team's going to go. We'll see, but I'm quite worried, actually, about that, just with the change, massive change in style.
And you're also giving a guy who doesn't speak really good Chinese, this Korean support, an AD carry whose aim isn't to smash lane. Whereas that was the thing. Here's the weird thing about why it worked with the Starhorn Royal Club. Yes, we all know the Uzi thing that the Insect thing that he just goes in and you have to follow up. But also as a support, in a weird way, if you have a Doublelift type AD carry who just wants to go super ham in the lane, that actually it makes them predictable. You know that they're just going to be really aggressive here, and you can work around that. Whereas actually one of the problems with playing a bot lane that's like balanced and you're trying to play passive sometimes, aggressive others, is that's communication is what's required there. That's when there's like nuances and are we really going to go in now? Whereas the other way before was like, well, you know when Uzi was going to contest this and when he wanted to fight this, and plus he used to just say go or whatever, and then he would go in. You remember that ridiculous clip from Worlds where he was like go, and you're like, yeah, where's the rest of it? No, that was all he said, and then they won that team fight. Like, this isn't going to work. What is this?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that was a huge thing where obviously at this Worlds, that team, the prior roster of Starhorn Royal Club would say, well, you know, we actually can just communicate with pings even a lot of the times for team fights. Yeah, like you said, that's probably not going to happen as smoothly with NaMei. And Zero, he would say it in the Riot interviews too, and when we got a chance to talk to him at Worlds with the Korean casters, he would always say, yeah, you know, I just pretend like I'm playing with my younger brother when I play with Uzi. You know, I'm just like, all right, you know, I'll just cater to what you want, and we'll just work around that, and we'll make it work. And if you get upset, like, I'll just tell you it's okay, and, you know, I'll just bring you back up. Like, I'll be your babysitter. And he would say, you know, and it took him a while to get used to that. But yeah, I do question how well things will work out now, because Zero got really good at that by the time of Worlds. He got very good at just 100% focus on Uzi and telling Insect, like, well, Uzi, I can't do this right now. Like, don't go in, please. Like, tell, you know, like, they would have their separate conversations about. And Insect would talk about that too. He was like, you know, the toughest thing about this team is, like, we can't make Uzi upset, because if he does, like, it's so hard to bring him back to focus, because he's a young.
So where they describe that, like, it's like the volcano, and the volcano god is angry, like.
He's like, I don't blame him if he gets angry, but the trouble is once he gets angry, it's hard to bring him back together for the very next game. Okay. I mean, sure, we can work with him against the next day, and so, you know, they found a system with that, but I do wonder. In theory, there's more potential with NaMei maybe, but it's just going to be a lot more work, especially for Insect and Zero, to work around that. See,
there's also the factor, I forgot this piece of drama that heightened it, Monty, was that someone before it was announced that it was NaMei, did you see the part where it was the chat log of what Zero was saying in his stream? And he said something like Uzi was #1 AD carry when I play with him. Now I got new AD carry. I think I can make him #1 AD carry. Is NaMei. It was like the way he revealed it even was like, oh my god, like this Zero kid. I think he likes drama. I think he's on board with this shit.
Yeah, Zero's definitely he's a character, and even since his days in Korea, he did like
he's funny.
He's a funny guy, and he is quite talkative. And, you know, at Worlds too, even the translate videos, he would just blatantly say like, well, yeah, you know, Uzi, he's just very aggressive, and I'm his babysitter, things like that, and. But, you know, we'll see if he can keep up with that, because he says that now, but it's going to be a whole different game. By all means, I think Zero is a great support, but it is a very different game, unless maybe they'll learn, you know, more language skills over the next season. Who knows?
Chobra, how much do you love Korea? As in, will you actually watch all of LPL just to watch these Korean stars play still? Is that interest there for you? Has it drawn you to LPL at all?
Like you said, I'm definitely more drawn to watching LPL now. In the past, for me too, like you said, there's just so many games for LCS, and even especially LPL. LPL actually used to be the last one I'd go to, like if I'm casting All-Star and Worlds, just because of also time and things like that. I just catch up on the important ones, and the teams out there, I would catch up on their VODs and, you know, talk to Monte. And then after, you know, at Worlds, I talked to Fresker and Kelsey and Pirate, all three of them. But now that these players are there, yeah, because that's what I used to watch here. Those are the players I went to. Those are the players I was excited about. So by all means, the interest is there. Some of them to see if they can continue to grow. Some of them to see if a lot of us were correct and that they maybe hit their peak. But I think I definitely have more interest in watching LPL now with the players there.
Let's play a morbid game. That's like a Thorin line right there.
Yeah,
don't have a sleepover at my house, guys. It sucks. Okay, let's play a morbid game, which is of the players who went to China, of the Koreans. So we're not going to include like the guys who were practice partners and B teamers and guys who technically went there, but we don't know who they are. Of the names that are well-known players, okay, we have to pick who we think the one who will underperform the most is. Who will be sent home crying? He didn't do well. Like he never lived up to expectations. Which guy outside of his old team or just in China and having to play with Chinese players? Which would you put your money on, Chobra, of all those big names to not actually do as well? Who are you thinking of right now?
Oh man,
I think most of them won't do as well.
Okay, thanks, Captain Sunshine.
But out of those, I think I want to say Dade.
Oh my god, why would you say that?
Not because of his results, but also similarly to just, I see Dade as quite similar to the likes of MaKNooN or Reaper, where there is a lot of focus. Like he needs to be in his comfort zone, and you're already, you know, somewhere else. Like you're not in a comfort zone. I just don't really see that working out as well. I'm also actually I don't have great high hopes for Rookie.
Did you hear that, Monty?
I would agree with that.
Who would your pick be?
Well, Dade's already been underperforming in China, so he's the easy one to point out. He's been playing quite abysmally in some of these cups that have been going during the off-season. I think Acorn will have issues without being able to communicate.
Fingers crossed, guys. Fingers crossed. If they need a player who can just play on his own in that lane and not lead any like sort of help or any team, I know the guy. I think I know the guy.
I think Imp will perform worse without Mata. In fact, I think that pretty much all the Korean players will fall off because just the communication issues, being in a different place. A lot of them probably aren't very motivated anymore with these large contracts and like infinite money. And
that's true. That is a huge part, because in Korea you basically were fighting for your lives by going for that trophy.
See, that's why I actually disagree, because in the same way, I actually thought when Insec went to China that he would have, I didn't think he'd be as good as he was, but I thought he would have like a second renaissance period at least, because I thought, well, that's a region that doesn't have many good junglers. They like to go ham and have these team fights all the time. That's Insec's world. So in that world, I actually think he won't be as good because he doesn't have Mata. I think he can still be really good though, because listen, he's a super aggro AD carry who wants to just shit on lane all the time, go into fights and go totally ham. I think China's the rain fit. That's like he's a kid who's all hopped up on Sunny D, Monty, and I'm about to throw him into a ball pit. I think this is his realm, bro. I think it's going to work out.
with Imp though on countless occasions.
Okay.
There will be times when he drinks a Sunny D, you throw him in the corner, and he says, I don't feel like playing ball today," and he just like sits there, right?
Yeah.
Like he's very just gonna do my thing. If I don't want to play today, I'm just not gonna play. I'll take the blame. Oh well.
So there's an emo element to Imp.
Yeah, but for him, it's not even being emo. He's just like, "Oh, you know, today I just feel lazy. Like I just don't want to play, man." And he sits there, and you know, there have been times where we'll be like, "Isn't your, you know, how are your teammates doing?" He's like, "You know, I don't really know. Mata says I should practice more. I probably should." He's very free spirited, I guess, to put it in a positive light. But I don't know. For Insect, it is very different because he was always very hungry, and that's why it worked well with him. Always wanted to go ham, but Imp, when he wants to play, yeah, he wants to go ham. But there are also countless times when he doesn't really feel like playing that much to that caliber, right? Putting in that effort for that.
Okay. Right, I think we've covered every topic under the sun here. Let's just wrap this bitch up. Do you have any final parting shots? Do you have any final words, Chobra?
I mean, you know, it was great to come out here and talk, and I am excited for, you know, League of Legends as a whole in 2015, especially Champions, which starts today. I guess people will see this after, but so hopefully a lot of people will be able to catch on to more Champions now with it being on Lolly Sports. Also for, you know, just shout out to all the people who have supported League of Legends and myself. You can find me on Twitter and a lot of different places, so you'll hear from me on and off.
I mean, technically in Asia, the year hasn't ended yet, Chobra. The Chinese New Year, when is that?
Middle of February.
Middle of February. What year is it right now, Chobra? Do you know?
I've no idea.
Is it the year of the donkey?
Oh, this right now it's the sheep.
The year of the sheep. Okay, so that's sort of like an alpaca. That's about all we can end on there. So, do you have any final words, Monty?
No, I'm done.